Sirius XM Left 127. Remember,
support the troops and the people that are fighting for our country.
Expect more. Sirius XM Left 127.
AP Radio News. I'm Ross Simpson.
What do we want? Justice! When do we want justice? When do we want it?
Justice for Trayvon rallies were held in 100 cities across the country today. Leon Jenkins, president of the LA NAACP, says outrage over George Zimmerman's not guilty verdict is not going to fade away.
We expect men who look like us, who understand. We understood the sensitivities of our president last night, but it's got to be a little bit more than that now.
Al Sharpton, who helped organize the rallies, says the movement is focused on legal and social reform, not on acts of violent retribution.
We are not coming out with violence. We're coming to denounce violence, the violence that was perpetrated on an unarmed, innocent young man named Trayvon Martin.
Sharpton was joined by Martin's mother at a New York rally.
We have moved on from the verdict. Of course we're hurting.
Yeah.
Of course we're shocked and disappointed. But that just means that we have to roll up our sleeves and continue to fight.
President Barack Obama says he and the First Lady are saddened by the death of veteran White House correspondent Helen Thomas.
President Obama calls Helen Thomas a true pioneer, opening doors and breaking down barriers for generations of women in journalism. The irrepressible White House correspondent was never shy about sharing her opinions as she used her seat in the front row of history to grill 10 presidents, often jabbing them with sharp questions. Obama says she kept presidents, himself included, on their toes because of, as he put it, her fierce belief that our democracy works best when we ask tough questions and hold our leaders to account. David Melendi, Washington.
Helen Thomas was the only correspondent in the West Wing to have her name on one of the chairs in the briefing room. This is AP Radio News. Lieutenant J.G. Thomas Hudner promised his wingman during the Korean War he'd come back for him. Hudner, who rose to the rank of captain, says Jesse Brown, the Navy's first black aviator, experienced problems when his fighter plane was on a mission and had to crash land.
During the course of the flight, Jesse called on the radio saying that he's losing power and he's probably going to have to land. Well, landing was not landing on a runway. He'd have to crash on the side of a mountain.
Hudner crash-landed his plane nearby in hopes of rescuing his friend.
His canopy was open by this time, so I could see him sitting there. And when I got to the cockpit, his words were, "Tom, we've got to figure out a way of getting out of here."
Hudner couldn't save Brown, but the 80-year-old Hudner landed in North Korea today to see if he can find his friend's remains and bring them home. I'm Ross Simpson, AP Radio News.
And we hear, this is Mike Fader on Sirius XM Left 127. And stay tuned. For 7 o'clock, we have an announcement about how this channel is being somewhat reformulated. Sirius XM Left 127 is going to have a new name, and it's got somewhat of a different lineup. And I will tell you more about that at 7 o'clock. Also, don't forget, anybody who's interested in what I do on the radio, and especially these days, I think you should check in on a semi-regular basis. Any questions about what happens on tonight's show, any comments about it, anybody who wants to find out what else I do on the radio or anything else I do, including information about my new book, just go to, for all of this stuff, and to contact me, get on my mailing list, go to FederFiles.com, FederFiles, FederFiles.com. And you can obtain all that information, but no prizes are available. All right. During our first hour, we're going to talk to somebody who has written a new book about the kind of intensive, almost military type of policing that you see everywhere these days. And I think a lot of people noticed it during Occupy because it made the news more, but it's been happening every day in this country for many years. And the book is called Rise of the Warrior Cop, The Militarization of America's Police Forces, and it's by Radley Balko. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Let me introduce you to people, and we'll go straight to talking about your book. Mr. Balko is an award-winning investigative journalist who writes about civil liberties, police, and prosecutors, and the broader criminal justice system. He's currently a senior writer and investigative reporter for the Huffington Post. And previously, he was a senior editor for Reason magazine and a policy analyst for the Cato Institute. And in 2011, the Los Angeles Press Club named him Journalist of the Year. And I guess this is something, since you've been reporting on these issues for a long, long time, you amassed all this information, and I guess then you decided you'd like to have this book come out, right?
Yeah, well, when I was with the Cato Institute, I wrote a white paper on this issue that was pretty close to book length already. Mm-hmm. And then over the years, I've continued to report on individual cases and on the broader trend. And then, as you mentioned, when the crackdowns on the Occupy protest heated up a couple summers ago, a couple, publishers said they might be interested in a book, and so here we are.
Yeah, the thing about the Occupy, now this is something, it shows how big the country it is and sort of how divided in a way, and I don't mean politically, just divided because there's so many people in different places living different kinds of lives. As you point out in your book, there are people who deal with these kinds of things every day, and it mostly has to do with drug laws, which we're going to get into. But during Occupy, a lot of people saw something I think they never had seen before, unless, of course, they go back to the 60s, like I did. But in this case, it was amped up by all the military hardware and the cops looking like something like Imperial stormtroopers from the movies. But yeah, we had to deal with this kind of stuff a lot back in the 60s, where cops would just, kick in doors and show up places like, thousands of cops or hundreds of cops way over over the edge. But here during Occupy, we saw all the shields, we saw the vests, we saw all kinds of stuff. And during Tampa and Charlotte, the Homeland Security gave close to $100 million to Tampa and Charlotte police departments, some to buy, military vehicles, and there's all these weapons and everything like that. And you write all about this in the book. So, in other words, people became aware of it then, but you're saying, of course, this has been going on mostly about drug law stuff for a long time, right?
Yeah, I think, I think you're right. In the mid to late 60s, we saw the first inklings of this. But it wasn't really until the early 80s when the drug war really started to heat up and become, less of a metaphor and more literal, that we really started to see mass militarization and really a blurring of the line between police officer and soldier. But even then, this kind of stuff has gone on for, 30 years now. And it'll flare up in the press for a few years, and it sort of dies down. The one thing we saw, I think, with the Occupy protest that was a little bit different is that, for the first time, these tactics were being used against, upper middle class white kids. And these were kids who had, they all had smartphones in their pockets. So they had video, they had audio, they could instantly upload the video to the internet where it could be stored on offsite servers. So the video would be preserved even if the police took your phone. And they knew social media. They knew how to get the word out. They knew how to spread these videos. And so, for the first time, we really saw these crackdowns almost as they were happening. And this, of course, was an echo of the Arab Spring a summer earlier, where, again, for the first time, probably in human history, we saw, democracy protesters and, people protesting for their freedom able to get word out about a government crackdown as almost as it was happening. And this is really, really powerful technology. And it's, the book is pretty cynical, but I think one of the kind of optimistic things that I look at in the book is this ability to hold government accountable and to bring some transparency through personal technology.
Yeah, all we had was back in the 60s when people look at the 68 convention, what happened after the fact. And then the most you ever got out of that was there were some people who were actually talking to live radio stations at the time, but that was the best of it. These days, it's astounding. And yet it keeps happening. It's almost as if the police feel like they have a ticket to ride here. In other words, they don't really care that much, apparently, that they are recorded all the time.
Well, I think that's true to a certain extent, but I do think that we're seeing, I think there's more, police officers are being held more accountable when, for instance, if a citizen video contradicts a police report, then the officer, the police department really then has no choice but to discipline the officer. So I do think we're seeing more, probably not enough, but more accountability on these things. And, I also think that, good police officers, and I've been on radio shows like this one where police officers have called in and said, look, I want to be recorded because, one, You know, I'm doing my job. I'm in the public. I'm on the public payroll. You know, I understand that's part of it, but also because, you know, police officers do often get falsely accused of abuse, and the more they're recorded, the more chance there is that there'll be video to, you know, refute false allegations. And I've talked to several police officers who said that citizen video has also exonerated them of false charges.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, so basically, I mean, you've told a couple of interviews already, and I noticed this, that you don't intend for anybody to think that you're anti-police or anti-cop. It's just this particular militarization that troubles you, as it troubles everyone else. And it's interesting that it comes, obviously, and as it should, from both sides of the political spectrum. I mean, here's a detail. The rise of SWAT teams nationwide. The number of annual SWAT deployments in the U.S. has gone from a few hundred in the 70s to 30,000 per year in the early 80s to 50,000 in 2005. And you say it's something like there's 100 to 150 times a day in places in this country, including small towns, right? Not small towns, but small cities, towns in places, you know.
I would say small towns too. I mean, there are, I've documented towns, you know, that have 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 people that have their own SWAT teams. I mean, there are cases where, you know, they have a 10 or 15 man police department and half of them are on the SWAT team. I mean, it's a kind of a, when the rival, you know, the closest police department closest to you get to a SWAT team, you sort of want one too. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the problem is once you have it, you want to use it, and you get the when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail problem.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, was there ever a weapon or something like that somebody didn't use? You know, but so what? So the question obviously becomes, and this is probably, you know, what you're saying, what you're telling everybody in the book in great detail, but basically, by the way, very clear and very alarming and very well written. How did this happen? In other words, so here we are in the home of the brave and the land of the free, where we're all individuals, and the police department are the friendly guys who twirl the batons, walking the beat. And so where do we get from there to here?
Well, I would start by saying, you know, I don't think there was ever kind of an idyllic time for policing. I mean, there was a time when police walked more beats, but that was also known as the patronage era, or some criminologists refer to it as the patronage era, where police officers were appointed by political bosses, and you know, there's a lot of corruption. And so, you know, I don't want to, you know, harken back to an era that didn't necessarily exist, but there certainly has been a change from the officer in blue, you know, who patrols the streets, to these sort of SWAT teams and highly militarized police officers that we see in a lot of places today. And so, so the question is, how did it happen? And that's kind of what the book gets into.
I just want to amend that. I mean, it's not as if I don't know there was always police brutality going all the way back, but it's, it's this refining technology and the money that's poured into it.
Yeah. And it's happened, the drug war has been the primary mover, I guess, in this trend. And, you know, in the 60s and 70s, late 60s, early 70s, we saw two trends sort of taking off. One was the rise of the SWAT team, which, you know, throughout the 70s, the SWAT teams were used in these emergency-type situations where you were using violence to diffuse an already violent situation, right? So hostage takings or bank robberies or active shooters. At the same time, you had Nixon declaring war on drugs, you know, passing policies like the no-knock raid. But, you know, for the most part, the two trends, you know, stayed sort of separate. They ran parallel to one another for about the first 15 years. The police were using more aggressive tactics, but they were still narcotics officers. You know, at worst, they were in plain clothes when they did these raids. It was really during the 80s that we see the two trends converge, and we start seeing these military tactics used to serve drug warrants on people suspected of, you know, nonviolent consensual crimes. And Reagan really kind of revamped the drug war with a compliant Congress, I would add. You know, for everything from bringing in the National Guard to start doing drug policing, to setting up these joint task forces where you have police agencies working directly with military, you know, various military groups on drug interdiction efforts, sharing, you know, equipment between the Pentagon and these domestic police agencies. And so this is really where you start to see the rise of SWAT teams. You know, police departments are getting all this military gear from the Pentagon. They want to use it, so they start a SWAT team. And then you get these federal grants that are tied to drug policing and nothing else. And so now you start to twist the priorities of these police departments. Now you've got a SWAT team. They're sort of expensive to maintain. you could keep them, in reserve until you have one of these emergency type situations, or, you can start sending them on drug raids, because when you send them on a drug raid, every drug arrest brings in some federal money for your police department. And then there's also asset forfeiture, which you can, with the police department takes property from people suspected of drug crimes and sells it, and the money goes back to the police department. And so now you get these heavy incentives to start using this very sort of violent, confrontational form of force for these nonviolent, consensual crimes like drug crimes. And
so
we start to see this take off.
It's a kind of a profit center for a local police department, then, right?
It really is, and these are federal programs. And I should say, this is, as you mentioned before, this is a bipartisan thing. I mean,
right.
This was started during the Reagan administration, but Reagan was widely criticized by Democratic leaders in Congress for not going far enough with this stuff. So it's really been both parties that have contributed to the problem. And
this is right up into the present time, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in the book, it's separated by decades, and we get right up into the present, where Obama has actually conducted more raids on medical marijuana clinics in 4 years than Bush did in 8, and he has funded all these programs at record levels, giving them budgets that they've never seen before. So yeah, I mean, it's not as if things are actually getting worse. And Obama the candidate, there was some hope that some of this stuff might be reined in, but Obama the president has really only exacerbated a lot of the policies that have driven these trends.
Yeah, I think the other thing you mentioned too is this glorification of the soldier. The fighting man, you get all these video games with these guys with improbable muscles or, a lot of steroids. And then you get this blending of these soldier heroes everywhere you go, and including if you look at the State of the Union address, there's flags everywhere. There are uniforms everywhere. The other night, the president presented, I forget what it's called, the American Medal of Freedom, whatever, to George Lucas and a bunch of other artists. And the man holding the next medal to give to him, next to him, is a highly decorated uniformed soldier. You know what I mean? There's the glorification in these two past wars we've had here, including the one that's ongoing now. The kind of a glorification. Maybe this started with Reagan. It's a new day for America, and also it goes along with the soldier and all the ads on TV. In other words, to be a soldier is a great, glorious thing. All these soldiers coming to the rescue. SEAL Team 6. That tough, the big muscles in the jaw and the flag behind it. And I think that kind of thing contributes to this too, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you look back to sort of classical societies and ancient societies, when a society starts to succumb to a culture of militarism, that collapse inevitably follows. I mean, that's certainly what happened with Rome. I will say, though, that, in this country, in the U.S., we've always had this aversion to using active duty soldiers for domestic policing, this idea of the posse comitatus, of putting a firm wall between the military and domestic policing. And, for the most part, we've kind of held to that. I mean, we don't have, the National Guard sort of straddles the line between cop and soldier, but we don't have, Marines doing drug searches or arresting people for drug crimes. And I will say this, I mean, I think the military as an institution has been one of the, primary objectors to, politicians have wanted to bring the military into drug policing, and the military has objected, and really, I think the military understands the importance of keeping that wall there more than a lot of politicians do. Now, that said, the argument I make in the book is that, while we've done a good job of keeping the military out of domestic policing, what's happened is, we've allowed and encouraged our cops to become more like soldiers, and the effect is, the effect on the communities and the effect between police and the communities, the relationship between police and the communities they serve is largely the same. So it's still the same problem. It's just happened in a different way.
Well, the idea that I think, as you mentioned to another interviewer, is that, you get a situation where the community is more afraid of the police than they are of the threats in their community that the police are there to protect them from.
Yeah, and this is partly a culture of militarization and kind of the soldier mindset that is set in a lot of police departments. But, it's also an effect of just, more kind of banal things like moving to squad cars. When when police officers spend all their time in a squad car, and the only time they get out and actually interact with the communities that they serve is when there's confrontation or they have to arrest someone or resolve some sort of domestic dispute.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that sows distrust on both sides. I mean, if the community only sees police officers when they're using force, the community is going to distrust police officers. But if you look at it from the perspective of the police officer, I mean, imagine you have a job where your only interaction with other people is, negative and confrontational. I mean, that's a miserable job.
That's true.
And
that's
I think,
true.
I think police officers today, and I'm speaking generally, of course, but I mean, there's there's a lot of anger, and I think a lot of it, goes back to this. They're sort of being put into communities that they don't feel a part of, that they don't have a stake in, and it can't be a pleasant experience. And I like this idea of community policing. If we have cops walking beats again, and you have them, knowing the stakeholders in the community, and really feeling that they're a part of the community that they're serving, so that one, it makes their job more pleasant and makes them more, eager to do their jobs. But then also when it does come time to use force, then the community sees the police officer as one of them and who's using force to protect them, and not sort of this outsider who's come in to harass people.
Well, this also goes along with, and this, I live in New York City, in Manhattan, and this fluctuates in New York City, it seems to me, over decades. Sometimes there were rules that you had to live inside the city that you were policing, or maybe, the town. Sometimes it didn't have to be that way. So if you have, not only are people riding around patrol cars with the windows up, which they do in Manhattan all the time, by the way. I mean, it could even, they have the air conditioning on. They're riding around there, and they sort of glide through the streets, like a separate kind of like species through the streets, staring out the window with this dead-eyed stare. It's not the friendliest feeling in the world. And then sometimes in some places you're not even required to live in the same community. You can commute from somewhere else, so you really don't belong to the community at all.
Yeah, and I think, if we can't have cops walking beats in Manhattan, where can we have them? I mean, that's New York. It's a very walkable city. No, and I agree. And I think, I talk in the book about in the early 70s, there was this fascinating thing going on in Washington, D.C., where D.C. there was a lot of crime. The Nixon administration was trying to impose some federal policies on D.C. because, of course, Congress, the federal government has jurisdiction over D.C. And one of them was this no-knock raid. And what was fascinating is that the police chief in D.C. at the time, this guy Jerry Wilson, refused to use a no-knock raid. He said it was too intrusive. He didn't, it violated people's civil liberties, and it was just unnecessary. And he also did a lot of this community policing type stuff. At the time, D.C. was, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was, the city is overwhelmingly black, and the police department was overwhelmingly white. They were recruiting police officers from, North Carolina and South Carolina,
right,
and Virginia and Georgia. And one of the things Wilson did was he tried to, one, make the city's police department more reflective of the city's population, and he tried to recruit people from D.C. to serve on the Metro Police Department. And one of the fascinating things that happened is as crime rose during the 70s over the entire country, it actually dropped in D.C. over that period.
Interesting.
So I think, there are a lot of variables at work here, and you can't directly attribute it to that. But it certainly, can hurt things. And I think there's some evidence in other cities that this type of policing actually does work.
It may be true. I mean, after all, we have the stop and frisk and the famous Ray Kelly here, so we have our own issues all the time. But I've noticed that as police departments, and even our own police department in New York City, as they get more diverse in terms of hiring, racially diverse, first, and women, then in New York City, more Latinos, more blacks in the police department, it hasn't really stopped what you're writing about in your book, which is called, let me remind people, The Rise of the Warrior Cop, the Militarization of America's Police Forces. I mean, as often as I pick up a paper and I see the cops who have kicked in a door somewhere or standing on the street, looking very menacing with all their equipment on, and they're often now more racially diverse, but they're still doing the same, they're still acting the same way.
Yeah, well, I mean, it isn't a panacea, but, there are other problems, and there are other perverse incentives that, can certainly overcome that. But, it certainly does help to try to have a police force that reflects, the community that the force is serving, I think.
Another thing you're writing about in your book is the tremendous amount of money involved. We mentioned it earlier that these SWAT teams can be profit centers for various reasons, but also between Homeland Security and the Defense Department, maybe you can explain this, a huge amount of weapons and money is flowing to these places, right?
Yeah, so for about 35 years now, the Pentagon has been giving away surplus military equipment to police departments across the country. And this really kind of drove the SWAT trend because, police departments don't have budgets to go out and buy tanks and helicopters and armored personnel carriers on their own.
Good.
So they were getting,
yeah.
So they were getting this money they were getting the equipment itself from the Pentagon that, the Pentagon has all this surplus equipment that it isn't using. And so that really drove the SWAT trend along with the federal grants. But then what we see after September 11th is the Department of Homeland Security starts giving grants to police departments across the country to buy this stuff new. And, the Pentagon program was troubling because, they were giving away equipment that was designed for use on a battlefield to be used in American cities and American neighborhoods, but it was equipment that already existed. What's been happening for the last decade is now we're getting these grants, which are basically checks that go to the police departments, and they're buying this new battle-grade equipment from private companies that have sprung up to build this equipment in exchange for these checks from the Department of Homeland Security. Now, these companies are now going to open lobbying offices in D.C. to make sure this stuff continues and expands, and they give out more and more money. And so we've basically, created a police industrial complex, sort of a little brother of the military industrial complex. And, once you get the sort of cycle of money, taxpayer money going to these companies in exchange for this gear, and then the companies then use that taxpayer money to lobby Washington for more money. Yeah. I mean, you get into this cycle, and that becomes very, very difficult to walk back.
These, basically what you're getting is the Homeland Security Department giving, and you mentioned this too, they're giving all these checks to the police departments, but they're not requiring any kind of, lists of things and obeying of all kinds of various rules. They're just giving the money to the police departments, and they can do what they like with it, right?
Yeah, and that's the same with all these grants. I mean, I talk in the book about this program called COPS, which was started actually by Vice President Biden when he was in the Senate during the Clinton administration. And the idea is to foster community policing, the type of policing I was just talking about that, seems to work and is less confrontational and less reactionary. The problem, though, is that, the federal government started giving these grants out, but there was no oversight. There were no restrictions on how the grants were used. And as it turns out, there are a lot of police chiefs and sheriffs who their definition of community policing is quite a bit different than the one I laid out.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And and these grants were actually being used to start SWAT teams. And, this is not how this program was sold. And unfortunately, I mean, believe it or not, the Bush administration was actually phasing these grant programs out, and the Obama administration refunded them, again at record levels, again with no restrictions or no oversight. And so, we don't know how this money's being spent.
Now, after 9/11, a lot of this money, obviously Homeland Security, is given out to places. The idea was to prevent or control or to stop terrorism. So we have this absurd thing happening all over the country that even in some towns, like let's say in Indiana or Arkansas or Oregon, you've got a SWAT team to prevent terrorism, right?
Right. And so, DHS is giving these grants out to places like, Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And, it's supposed to be anti-terror grants, but of course, they use this money, they buy their tank or armored personnel carrier or, M16s. And then, obviously a terrorist attack doesn't happen. But then again, you get this equipment and you want to use it. And so then it gets, repurposed into more mundane policing, like serving drug warrants and patrolling and, some of the more day-to-day policing activities. And so, again, the equipment is sold on the idea we need to protect the country from terrorism. And then it ends up being used, against American citizens in American streets, American neighborhoods, for much more mundane purposes.
Yeah, in a terrifying manner, to use a certain word. So what is the solution here? I mean, if we're if we're on this kind of cycle, which you point out, this lobbying money, police, SWAT, if we're on that junior corporate, military industrial complex thing with the cops all over the place, what could possibly prevent that? How, as citizens, do we deal with this kind of thing?
Well, that's a tough question.
I know.
how do you institute social change in general? This stuff is going to be hard to overcome, and part of the problem is that no politician wants to look anti-police. Neither do journalists who write books about police. And so it's going to be difficult for them to stand up and say, maybe this has gone too far. Maybe we need to have a debate about this. And this is, I point this out in the book. I mean, this is part of the problem is that nobody decided, hey, let's militarize our police departments, right? This is a gradual thing that's happened over a generation or so, and it's the culmination of a number of policies and a number of unintended consequences of those policies. So there never has really been a discussion or a public debate about this. It's just sort of happened under our noses, and we've become very comfortable with it. I use a quote in the book. There's an old Cold War saying, democracy means that when there's a knock on the door at 3 a.m., it's probably the milkman.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've come so far from that. They don't even knock anymore, right? And they kick down your door in the middle of the night, and we've become very sort of, that's become an acceptable part of, what we consider a free society. And I think we need to reconsider that. I think part of it's just awareness. I found that when people actually see how these raids are conducted and see video of these raids, they tend to be pretty disturbed and outraged at what they see.
Mm-hmm.
So I think part of it is just making people aware of what's going on. Beyond that, you've got to start locally. I think it's important to, know what your own police department is doing. You should know, you can file open records requests. They're very easy to file. Find out how your local SWAT team is being used and for what purposes. And, if you find that, they were sent out 100 times last year and, it only resulted in, 10 drug charges, then you can make the argument like, look, this is out of control. Like the SWAT team is being used far too often.
Mm-hmm.
On the national level, I think it's just a matter of, politicians are the ones who set these policies. You can rail at the cops and vent all this anger at the cops, but the cops are just the product of the policies and the systems in place that are governed by those policies. So, the politicians are the ones that are the only ones that can change this. And until this sort of thing becomes an issue that people vote on, until politicians who encourage this kind of behavior, encourage these policies, who, use the war rhetoric and the martial rhetoric, until that becomes a liability for them, they're not going to change. And so I think,
mm-hmm.
Again, it goes back to awareness. It goes back to letting people know what's going on. And then, hopefully people will become outraged enough to start voting on this stuff.
Well, I think that's very well put. I mean, it's that way with everything that happens. It's now there's a buildup with this whole NSA thing. The awareness, as you point out, is making everybody, take 2 steps back or at least question people. Judges are starting to say, and federal judges in courtrooms are saying, wait, not in my court, that kind of thing. So, but the awareness is everything. And I have to say that there's not one day where I don't get updates from various websites or read even things on the Huffington Post that shows me some police, team kicking in a door or arresting or even shooting or wounding the wrong person. This happens almost every day. But what's good, I mean, that's awful, but what's good is I'm seeing it more all the time, and so is everybody else.
And I think the public perception of this is changing. I mean, I've been reporting on this issue for 7 or 8 years now, and I remember when I would first report, people would send me these local news accounts of botched raids,
mm-hmm.
and wrong door raids, and you'd read the comments, and there was always probably 10-1 pro police. It was always, well, maybe they got the wrong house, but this person was probably doing something wrong, or there were always sort of these excuses. And I tell you, I mean, today, now it's the tenor has changed quite a bit. I mean, I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal today on this particular issue, and that's a pretty, conservative readership.
Right.
And the comments were overwhelmingly, supportive of the points I was making. I mean, people are...
Well, that's interesting. In the Journal, of all places. Yeah.
Yeah, people are concerned about this stuff, and I think that's a good sign. I think awareness is causing people to ask questions.
Okay, the book is by Radley Balko, Balko, obviously available everywhere and anywhere. Rise of the Warrior Cop, The Militarization of America's police forces. It's one of those books you want to get for all sorts of reasons, but this guy is who's writing this book has been at it for years and years and years and years. He's an expert on it, and he writes well. So this is why you want to get the book. And it's also part of the awareness. You can get this book, your eyes will pop open a little wider, and you probably want to loan it out to people. This is what happens. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Okay, Radley Balko, B-A-L-K-O, and Rise of the Warrior Cop. It's really something to read about. We're going to take a break, and we can come back, and we can take some calls if you have any comments on this. It's 866-997-4748, 866-997-4748. Call during the break, and we'll put you right on. Let's go to a break.
Mark Thompson on Sirius XM Left. Mark Thompson.
Some of what I saw revealed that the police at different points along the way were friendly with Zimmerman, and they let him play cop. Now, Tom, you and Michael have represented defendants. I wonder how many of your clients were chauffeured around by the police to recreate the scene.
Make It Plain with Mark Thompson. Weekdays at 6 p.m. East, 3 West. On Sirius XM Left. 127.
I'm Julia Cunningham from Sirius XM's Entertainment Weekly Radio. Join us as we take you inside the biggest entertainment event of the summer, Comic-Con 2013. All the stars, characters, series finales, and the exclusive sneak peek. We're talking shows like The Big Bang Theory, Breaking Bad, The Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, and all the biggest summer blockbusters. Comic-Con 2013 on Entertainment Weekly Radio, Sirius XM 105, or listen on the Sirius XM app.
Sirius XM Left 127. Challenging.
Take care of the people that we need to take care of in this country.
Expect more. Sirius XM Left 127.
Yeah, you should listen to that man say Sirius XM Left 127, because soon that will be a collectible announcement. You know, people collect baseball cards and they collect old computers and things like that. Sirius XM Left 127 is going to be a collectible very soon. Anything that refers to Sirius XM, because it's going to turn into something else, which I have an announcement about probably at 7 o'clock or maybe sooner. I wanted to say one thing before we go to our two callers on the line. Last week, we did what I think is always a kind of an interesting show. We had some really good guests on. I talked about stuff in what I hope has become a kind of inimitable style, you know, like informative or entertaining at the same time. A lot of effort went into that show, as it goes into every show I do. So I read books, right? Whole books during the week. I read, I don't know, dozens of articles. I read the paper. I give it a lot of thought. I write down questions. I get people on here. And when I ask for calls often, I get 2, 3, 4 calls. And when I get these calls sometimes, some of them are good, but some of them are people who tune in at the last second and say, I have something to say, and it has nothing to do with what went on the whole night. People call up sometimes, they're drunk, they're out of it. If you call up with an opinion that's different than mine, you know, sometimes I get hot with people, but I don't mind that. But sometimes people call up, they have no idea what they're talking about. They have no idea why they even called. And sometimes people don't call up at all. Now, I understand that it could be scary to call up a radio show. I, you know, have called up radio shows maybe a half a dozen times in my whole life, even though I've been on the air for 35 years. And I get nervous when I'm hanging on and speaking on somebody else's radio show. There's something about it. It makes you nervous. I understand that. I also understand it's Saturday night on the East Coast, or Saturday, you know, getting into Saturday night. It's Saturday evening, and that it's Saturday afternoon. A lot of people are out there with their families. They're doing things, or you're going out, going out on the town, if that's what you do, if you have money. Good for you. There's all kinds of things going on. It's Saturday, right? And yet, I do all this work, and what I'd like to see is people who write me all these emails, and I know there's a lot of people listening. I'd like to see more calls. I need to see more calls. To me, although it sounds silly because I'm the one who does all the talking a lot of the time, to me, this is a cooperative venture. We're all in the same boat. Well, I'm talking about issues that affect all of us all the time. And yet, when I finally do this, after all the guests and all the commentary and all the issues I'm talking about, I get 2 calls, I get 3 calls, I get people calling up who, I get the same people calling all the time. And some of them are terrific callers, and some of them, aren't. But that's fine. I'm glad that they call up. But I never hear, from a lot of you people who might even subscribe to my website or send me emails. Where is everybody? I would like people to call up if you're listening here and you like this show, please do me a favor and call up. It's not such a big deal. If you're nervous, I'll help you through it. You know, I mean, it's not such a big deal in the end. All right, we have a couple of callers here. Who do we have? Stephen from Burbank. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Hi, Mike.
Hey.
What Bradley Balco is talking about is so hardwired, interlinked with what the reality is, which also includes the surveillance state.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, in order to resist that surveillance state, we can take action that does not involve violence. And I did something today, and I hope nobody thinks it's funny, but it's something I did as an act of resistance. I went to the 7-Eleven on the corner, and I bought the latest issue of Rolling Stone.
Mm-hmm.
I took the cover of Rolling Stone. I took the $10 bill I was going to pay for it. Hamilton. So here's a picture of Jahar Zarne, and here's a picture of Alexander Hamilton, and I hold it up to the camera, the surveillance camera in 7-Eleven, and I'm pointing to the cover to my face, to the cover to my face, to the cover to my face.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to me, that is an act of resistance. And we're saying, like, we are not afraid of your state power. We are not afraid of your surveillance. And it's not saying that we accept it. It is merely saying to the power structure, we know who you are, we know what you're doing, and we know why you're doing it.
Well, see, this is it's a good idea to point that you pointed this out, because I was going to mention this with Mr. Balco, but he had a limited amount of time, and I wanted him to speak as much as possible. Clearly, this whole idea of SWAT teams and militarized police goes, as you point out, hand in hand with the national police state, with all this surveillance. These are all parts of the same monstrous whole. And you're right. What we need to do is constantly demonstrate that we are not afraid of this all the time. And eventually, if it gets to be big enough and wide enough, they're going to have to back off. This is our votes. This is our taxes. And unless they actually want to declare a dictatorship, then they're going to have to deal with this all the time. And you know, I'm glad you pointed all this out. We do have some calls after I spoke about this. People have called up, so I should honor that and move on.
You're great, Mike.
Thanks, Steve. Let's go. Who do we have next? Bob, you're on. Go ahead, Bob.
Really good interview, Mike.
Thanks.
Sounds like the public is being used as a training ground to keep the SWAT teams up to par through these drug raids and other uses in the community.
Oh yeah, they go out on practice. They kick in doors where people have been, they believe that people are in there with possession of marijuana, and that's why they'll kick in a door. These are not even regular drug dealers. It's just people who possess marijuana. They'll kick in doors, surround the place. They'll have, lasers. They'll have, blast grenades. They'll have military personnel carriers. They do it because they can, and they do it because they're getting the money for it. And it's up to us to stop this, to reverse this flow.
They're doing it in the country too with the meth labs, and they're doing it in other areas of the country. And it seems like there's a School of the Americas equivalent for the police departments in our country.
Yeah, if they have a reason, being a police officer can be really a dangerous job, putting it mildly. I mean, and if there's a place where they have a reason to suspect, any reason to suspect that people will be armed and dangerous, then you don't need all that stuff, but you do need to protect yourself, and you do need, the best weapons you can get. But to do this over and over again, all over the place, usually mistakenly, sometimes kicking in a door or kicking in a door, throwing children to the ground, terrifying people. This is Nazi Germany. This is Russia, at its worst. This is not the Americas that we want to live in. We're going to move on. Take another call, Bob. Who do we have? Charles. Hey, Charles from Illinois. Here you go. You're on.
How you doing?
All right.
I just calling in. I noticed in Bradley, Illinois, area of under 50,000 people. It's kind of a tri-city area.
Yeah.
But I noticed the Bradley police, their license plates say MP.
Do they really?
If you look at the fine print underneath, it says municipal police.
But it sounds like military police.
But there's a subliminal message there.
That's amazing.
MP. Cops, they all got military haircuts. You see them in the gym. They're all bodybuilders.
Yeah, that's the new thing too, right? There are all the cops that when I was growing up in the 50s and even in the 60s, a lot of cops would turn out and they all look like Officer Krupke. You know what I mean? They had these pot bellies. They, I don't want to idolize it. There was never a time when the police were not too brutal. They could be too brutal, and they didn't obey any kind of laws, and they were out of control, and they were corrupt. That happened a lot off and on forever since there have been cops. But this new thing where everybody is all beefed up on steroids and uses the gym and looks like Sergeant Rock and has all these weapons, this is a new thing in the world.
Yeah. Well, I feel like this whole country's being indoctrinated.
Well, that's how it is, and part of the problem is that it all blends in with this kind of ridiculous, shallow patriotic reverence for the military. Every time there's a public event or they could have women's junior field hockey and they got Marines on the field. Enough with this already.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyhow, I should move on. All right. So
okay.
I'll be talking to you around the way.
Okay.
All right. Okay, who do we have? Eric from Indiana, you're on.
Hey, man. I'm going to be one of those guys, I guess, that changes the topic a little bit on you.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
You're used to it. But I want to talk a little bit about income inequality. And I called you actually a couple of months ago. And one of the things that I pointed out, you might remember, was Babe Ruth, back in the 1920s, made headlines for being like the very first major leaguer to make more than the President of the United States did. Mm-hmm. And that was a pretty big deal. I mean, the general public was just, thinking to themselves, "Oh my God, how could a baseball player be making more than the leader of the free world?" And some, reporter put a microphone in front of him and said, "Well, hey, how do you feel about making more than the President of the United States makes?" And he famously quipped, "Well, I had a better year than the president." And it was pretty funny, but I mean, but probably true. But I mean, just fast forward to today. And the league minimum for a baseball player is $400,000 a year, and that coincidentally is what the President of the United States earns. And so that just kind of shows, we as a society, just kind of accept that, like the players that sit on the bench and don't really play and they don't have the star power, but the league minimum is equivalent to what the President of the United States earns.
Well, let me amplify what you're saying. Alex Rodriguez, who is the biggest, buffoon, the most expensive buffoon in baseball, Alex Rodriguez of the New York Yankees, who makes $25 million a year, of course, has been injured over and over again. That's probably because he took too many steroids and sent down to the minors. And his rehab is taking place in the minors. And he's playing in Reading, Pennsylvania, a Yankees farm team in Reading, Pennsylvania. The average median income in Reading, Pennsylvania for a family is $27,416. He makes 1,000 times more a year to hit a baseball than the average head of a family in Reading, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I mean, it almost brings you to your knees. I mean, there's like relief pitchers that are making tens of millions of dollars a year, and some sports writer a few years ago, I don't even know who the player was, but they, some of these relief pitchers throw 10, 20 pitches a game, and they, extrapolated that out to like they were making like $10,000 plus per pitch.
Yeah, Rodriguez gets up, and every time he swings and miss, he gets paid $10,000.
Yeah, right. That's just baseball. But I mean, look at entertainment.
I know.
It's like Ted Danson from Cheers. Back in the 1980s, it was reported that he made like $250,000 per episode, and a lot of people were like, "That is just insane." Well, fast forward another decade, and you have the top echelon, like the Seinfeld cast, I think, was making $1 million per episode.
$1 million per episode, and we have to move on. We have other calls on the topic that we were talking about, but this income inequality, since you mentioned it, is something which is the underlying theme of everything that we talk about here. Everything we talk about, the underlying theme is the fact that most people are being paid nothing. And a few people have all the money, and that is what's at the rotten core of what America is going through today. So I'm gonna move on. Take one more call.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, thanks for calling. Who do we have? Dale from Massachusetts. You're on.
Hey, Mike.
Hey.
A couple things. Obviously, I'm in Cambridge, Mass.
Okay.
Which is very close to Watertown. What the public didn't see, and I believe I've found this video in one of the comments section. The police this was a video was taken by a neighbor from their house. The police raided this house, and now I have no idea, why, but obviously when they were looking for the bomber, they might have, suspected that he was in this house. But the way they were treating these people that were coming out of the house, it was like they were yelling at them and telling, get down, get down. I mean, it was really, really something. But what scared me is I work very early in the morning, and I was coming home that day, and that was before I found out that they wanted people to stay in the homes. Mm-hmm. And it was so eerie because the streets were just deserted. And they had contacted, all the companies in the area and asked them, the stores not to open.
Mm-hmm.
So people actually had nowhere to go because nothing was open. But it was really,
the police are generally sort of out of control. They believe that there's something better about them than the citizens that they're out there to protect. It's the same way as the military believes that they're better than the citizens that they're supposed to be defending. Things have gotten turned upside down in this country.
Yeah.
Anyhow, thanks for calling in. Thanks, sir. Thanks for calling in. Can we take one more quick call? Who do we have? John in Michigan. We got about 2 minutes for you. Go ahead.
Real quick, read an alternate, all the other places about this book, the excerpts. About a week and a half ago, I've been reading about this book.
Yeah.
And, all of the excerpts and all the, aberrant behavior in this. Now, I live in West Michigan. Okay, and I'm working in the northern part of Grand Rapids, and I'm coming down 131 the other day, which is a main expressway from Grand Rapids up to the northern Michigan area, okay? And, historically, everything with the Michigan State Police is painted navy blue and gold, okay, no matter what they have. All of a sudden, I'm coming up on this big military six-wheeled vehicle painted in flat black, Michigan State Police armored car with the big 6 tires on it.
Unbelievable.
And I'm thinking to myself as I'm coming up on it, what in the hell could take place where they would actually need this son of a bitch? Without where you could just call in the National Guard if you had to.
Yeah.
You understand? And so then while I'm passing it, which may have even been mentioned in these articles, I see the 2 guys that are driving it. It's got like a convertible top. They're actually exposed. And they're both wearing camouflage. Now, why do they have to be wearing camouflage?
Oh, man. I mean, this is it's really out of control. It's out of control.
And I just got done reading all these articles, so I'm thinking, it's just, you're just so powerless over it. All you can really do is you want to be engaged, you want to be active, but you get so flummoxed to a point where it's like all I can do is take care of like the 8 feet around me and just try to do the best.
That is the reaction everybody has. People don't. I know people don't even read the newspaper anymore. Other people, they just shake their heads and they try to just keep their heads down.
I have to back off to it.
Yeah.
Like one of those stories in that article about how they treated the 80-year-old lady. I mean, I don't know.
They hold guns on people that they shouldn't be. They throw kids to the ground. During Occupy, they were taken perfectly, obviously people who had no sense and who had no violence in them whatsoever, and they were smashing their faces into car windshields onto the ground, and then the press comes down to cover all this, and they put their elbows into the throats of people in the press. They throw people in the press up against walls, and nobody does anything about it. I don't know how long this can go on. I don't know.
And it's what's really unreal is how when they've come in and they've perpetrated all the damage on these people, and then it's just like, oh, sorry, and they just leave.
Yeah, and then they're usually not.
It's kind of like that Monty Python movie where the 3 kings came and gave the gift to Jesus, and then they realized they went to the wrong house, and they just come back and push everybody down, take the stuff, and leave.
Yeah, well, usually people who intelligent people who do satire are years ahead of what's really going on.
That's the truth.
I gotta go. We're at the end of the hour. All right, thanks for calling. I appreciate everybody for calling. I appreciate everybody calling up. I do. This is a great response to my request for calls. If you're still on the line, we don't have any time. We have to end the hour now. However, we are coming back after the 6 o'clock news with a review of all the things that happened with the Supreme Court in the Supreme Court's past term. And some of those things were really quite staggering and overwhelming and affected a lot of us and the whole country. And we're going to review this with an expert on Supreme Court and the effect they have on people and the constitutional laws and other policies that they were making decisions about. This is after the 6 o'clock news. And then after that, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people interested, including maybe some of you. And that's when I'd like to get your calls. So don't forget to call back after that.
Thom Hartmann on Sirius XM Left. Thom Hartmann.
Coming up next on the Thom Hartmann program, care for a little salt on your food? A new report is out shaking up the CDC's recommendations on salt use. Is it bad science? I'll challenge Michelle Minton of the Competitive Enterprise Institute. And the best of the rest of the news, along with your calls, right here on the Thom Hartmann program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week for We the People.
The Thom Hartmann Show, 3 p.m. East, noon West on Sirius XM Left, 127.
AP Radio News. I'm Carlotta Bradley. Trayvon Martin's mother spoke out today ahead of rallies planned around the country to push for federal action in her son's case.
Sabrina Fulton thanked supporters in New York at Al Sharpton's House of Justice in Harlem, saying, "I stand with New York because New York stands with me."
We have moved on from the verdict. Of course we're hurting.
Yeah.
Of course we're shocked and disappointed. But that just means that we have to roll up our sleeves and continue to fight.
Rally organizers say they want to keep pressure on the Justice Department's civil rights investigation and are also calling for a repeal of stand your ground laws. Julie Walker, New York.
Rallies have been held across the country, Miami and Los Angeles. At least 46 people have been killed and dozens wounded in a string of evening attacks in Iraq. A wave of car bombs tore through bustling commercial streets in Shiite areas of Baghdad, just as Muslims were breaking the daily Ramadan fast. More than 250 people have been killed in Iraqi violence since the start of Ramadan, July 10th. Palestinians say the U.S. is backing a key demand before talks with Israel resume.
A Palestinian official says Secretary of State John Kerry left behind a letter pledging that when talks resume with Israel in a few days, border negotiations will be on the basis of the ceasefire lines before Israel captured the West Bank in 1967. Israel hasn't agreed to that in public. One of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's main coalition partners threatens to pull out of the government if he accepts that. Palestinians say Kerry's letter also calls on Israel not to build in its settlements and on the Palestinians to stop moves against Israel in world bodies. Mark Levy, Cairo.
U.S. Ambassador Michael McKinley is calling for the immediate release of an American that Colombian rebels claim to be holding. This is AP Radio News. China wants to know who's responsible for the death of a Chinese student in an airplane crash in California 2 weeks ago.
In the moments after Asiana Flight 214 crashed and burned, 16-year-old Yi Ming-wan was on the ground, covered in the firefighting foam rescue workers were spraying to douse the flames. But she was alive until a fire truck ran over her.
Obviously, this is very difficult news for us. We're heartbroken. We're in the business of saving lives.
San Francisco Fire Chief Joanne Hayes White calls Yi's death a tragic accident. She says she doesn't foresee any disciplinary action, but the Chinese consulate is calling on authorities to place responsibility for Yi's death. I'm Rita Foley.
Signs of an improving U.S. economy are helping to boost the price of oil to its highest level in 16 months. Benchmark crude for August delivery rose a penny yesterday to close at $108.05 a barrel in New York. I'm Carlotta Bradley, AP Radio News.
Okay, we're back. This is Mike Fader on Sirius XM Left 127. Stay tuned at 7 o'clock after we talk to our guest about the Supreme Court this hour. At 7 o'clock, we have an announcement about changes here at Sirius XM Left 127 that you will definitely want to hear about, and then we're going to talk about some other issues, too. We are going to talk tonight about the last couple of months in the Supreme Court, about all the decisions in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's term recently ended with lots of major rulings, and affirmative action, voting rights, gay rights, a few other decisions too that haven't been as prominent but are interesting to me. And to discuss all this and to sort of interpret it for us is Bruce Ackerman. He's with us. He's the Sterling Professor of Law and Political Science at Yale. And hello.
How are you?
Okay, how you doing?
Talk to you, Mike.
I should also point out that Mr. Ackerman is the author of 15 books that have had a, well, why not?
Okay.
You know what? You did it. Don't you? I'll say it. You don't have to say it.
Right.
15 books that have had a broad influence in political philosophy and constitutional law, public policy. A couple of these books, Social Justice in the Liberal State and a multi-volume constitutional history, We the People. Most recent book is Decline and Fall of the American Republic. And this is emphasizes the dangers of presidential unilateralism at home and abroad. And that's obviously more than prophetic. And Mr. Ackerman served as a lawyer on matters of public importance. He was a lead witness for President Clinton before the House Judiciary Committee's impeachment hearings, and a principal spokesperson for Al Gore before the Florida legislature during the election crisis of 2000. So the term just ended, and we have some major issues, and maybe we could just take them one at a time. Obviously, the thing that people are talking about perhaps more than anything else universally is affirmative action. Affirmative action is the Voting Rights Bill. But affirmative action is sort of attached to that in a way, but the Voting Rights Act. And and this is the case that was stemming from Shelby County versus Holder. Maybe you could go over the case and how it's worked its way up and what it's about and what happened.
Sure. Well, this is an opinion of the greatest importance. The basic question here is what should we think of? What will the law make of the legacy of the Civil Rights Revolution? I should say, in the list, I'm happy to report that the third volume of We the People is coming out in February, and it's on the Civil Rights Revolution.
Okay.
And so right at the center of the Civil Rights Revolution is the Voting Rights Act of 1965, enacted in response to these dramatic scenes at Selma and with Lyndon Johnson making this great speech before Congress in which he adopts the rhetoric of the civil rights movement and proclaims, we shall overcome. And the Voting Rights Act was a revolutionary transformation in American law. What it did was to say that states in the South, but also in other parts of the United States over time, that had histories of discrimination should be under federal supervision. And before they could change their voting laws, both having to do with the polls, access to the polls, but also gerrymandering, racial gerrymandering and the like, they had to get the approval of the Justice Department or the a three-judge court sitting in Washington, D.C.
Now, all this is based on the 14th Amendment, right?
Well, you see, this brings us right to the opinion, which I have to say, I use these words with great reluctance, is incompetent. You said the 14th Amendment. Well, you're quite right. The 14th Amendment should have been involved in this case, in a way I'll explain in a moment. But Justice Roberts only talks about the 15th Amendment in his opinion. The 14th Amendment has Section 1 is a very famous grant to the freedmen of citizenship. Section 2 is much less well known, but that doesn't excuse Chief Justice Roberts from ignoring it. What Section 2 of the 14th Amendment says prohibits, I won't give you the quotation, but prohibits Well, let me put it this way. It says that if a state bars or abridges black voting rights, it shall lose representation in the House of Representatives, and it shall also lose, as a result, representation in the Electoral College in proportion to the population of the blacks whose votes it has prohibited or abridged.
Mm-hmm.
This authorizes the United States government to select out states for special treatment. You see.
Mm-hmm.
Chief Justice Roberts never talks about this provision and proclaims a principle of equal state sovereignty that is the basis of his opinion. This is sheer professional incompetence.
Well,
I say this with this, he could, if he had confronted this,
mm-hmm.
he could tell us why he thought it wasn't important.
But he could make a decision by not confronting something on purpose. In other words, he doesn't have to be so much as...
The Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the land.
Mm-hmm.
He is declaring the centerpiece, or not, one of the centerpieces of the Civil Rights Revolution unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
And he does not refer to a relevant constitutional provision.
Well, maybe he just did that on purpose.
Well, if he did, this is malpractice.
Well, what's new?
An acceptable. This is we call it. This is, we can talk in larger terms.
Yeah.
Here, but this is a violation of the rule of law. You cannot. The Supreme Court of the United States, and Chief Justice Roberts would be the first to recognize this. I know Chief Justice Roberts. He and I both were law clerks for Henry Friendly, who is a great judge.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
On the Court of Appeals. I'm older than he is, but I say this with gravest reluctance.
Hmm.
I'm not, but this is unforgivable.
Maybe what we should do is point out exactly what the opinion addressed and why it caused so much trouble. In fact, it has already set off almost immediately, states like Texas and other places to revise their voting laws. And we're talking about, these really restrictive and clearly discriminatory voter ID laws and other even worse laws.
Well,
so what happened in the opinion and what sections of the Voting Rights Act, and how did they go about doing this?
You see, Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act,
right,
was enacted, as I suggested, in 1965. Then it was revised in that was reaffirmed in 1970, and then in 1975.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. No, it's 1975. Now, in 1975, this kind of extraordinary intervention was sort of entrenched into the Constitution, into the living Constitution. It was extended for 7 years more until 1982, and the triggering formula was updated to 1972, the last presidential election.
Mm-hmm.
Then it was renewed in 1982 by Ronald Reagan and his Congress for a quarter of a century. But it used the same formula for picking out the states that had a history of discrimination and generated a risk of backsliding so far as black voting rights are concerned.
And does it help to know this formula, or is it too complicated, or what?
Well, it says that if there wasn't I'll simplify it, but
yeah, sure.
Basically, if there wasn't 50% voter turnout in 1972,
mm-hmm.
Or 50% registration, then the federal government could intervene.
I see. Okay.
Supervise to make sure that the black vote wasn't being suppressed.
So Section 4 gives you the formula. Section 5 shows you what the federal government can do.
That's right. And what Section 5 says is that you can. They're going to pre-screen to determine whether any change in the rules has a purpose or effect of discriminating against blacks or minorities.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2006, Congress, 2005, 2006, Congress held enormous numbers of hearings on whether to update this formula.
Mm-hmm.
Many studies were presented in support of the proposition that it was still doing a good job in identifying states which have had a history of, since 1965, of attempting to limit and suppress black voting.
Right.
A lot of studies. There are a lot of people who said it wasn't doing a good job.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we pay Congress to do, to make decisions like this. It's that formula which Chief Justice Roberts attacks on the ground that it is in violation of this constitutional principle that he invents, which says that the federal government, in terms of voting practices, has to treat states equally unless there's a compelling evidence otherwise.
Well, where the compelling evidence has been in everybody's faces for a long time, right?
Well, but as I mentioned to you, there is no such principle. He simply ignores the constitutional provision, which explicitly says, "Look, Alabama, what this constitutional provision, Section 2 of the 14th Amendment, explicitly does is something much more severe than what the Voting Rights Act actually does.
Mm-hmm.
It says, if, let's say, there's a state in which there is 40% blacks, and you are suppressing 40% all of the black vote by one or another technique, then, and you have you would ordinarily have 10 members of the House of Representatives, you only get 6.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the Constitution of the United States says. And Chief Justice Roberts says, there's no constitutional principle for saying that if states are particularly discriminatory against blacks, Congress can't act against them.
Now, this was a 5-4 vote.
That's right.
In the dissents, did they point out what you're pointing out?
No.
No?
No. Justice Ginsburg, it's really quite a remarkable, this is a shocker. And I'm telling this to you right now. This will be a feature of my book on the Civil Rights Revolution, which is coming out, as I said, in February, concludes by an elaborate analysis of this opinion.
Well, it's extraordinary.
Right.
It's hard.
Shocking.
It really is. I mean, there it is. The 14th Amendment. It lays out exactly what you're saying, and the entire court manages not to reference it.
That's right. That's right. This is a really a striking embarrassment.
Why can you, aside from just saying that it's incompetent, can you think of any other reason why all of these extremely learned people would ignore such a basic thing?
You see, of course, this isn't a very well-known provision, but that's hardly anything.
Yeah, but they know it.
I mean, it's when I read it, I just couldn't believe it.
Huh.
And I was telling a couple, I think that one of my colleagues might have mentioned this in one or another connection. But this is a serious problem. Now we move beyond. I don't want to bore your.
All right. So let's to break it down. Section 4. So all these states like Texas and God knows how many other states, a lot of them down south, are just straining there like dogs at the end of a leash, waiting to be let loose.
Now of course, we shouldn't overstate this. That is to say,
well, that's my job.
It didn't strike down. The court did not strike down the other provisions of the Voting Rights Act.
Well, Section 5 follows Section 4.
It didn't strike down Section 5. That is to say that if Congress in the future redoes the formula,
Mm-hmm.
Section 5 is rehabilitated.
So, but now I read a little bit about the history of this. They already had a case about 3 or 4 years ago in which they clearly almost sort of warned Congress that if they didn't act to revise this formula, because in their opinion it needed revision, that they would do this. Is that correct? They telegraphed this.
Yes, that's right.
Okay,
that's right. But you know, I'm sort of an old-fashioned guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think the law is important. It's not they warn. The question is, the question is, what is the foundational justification of what the Supreme Court is doing? And what the Supreme Court is doing is saying, Congress. I think that the basic fact of the matter is, President Bush in 2006 and the Congress had a lot of other things on their hands. The country was reeling in the shock of 9/11. We were fighting 2 wars. There was all of this hysteria about a global war on terror. The Southerners who were in George Bush's party
mm-hmm.
were, wanted to kill the Voting Rights Act.
Mm-hmm.
George Bush didn't allow this to happen, and in fact insisted, and the Republicans and Democrats with overwhelming majorities
mm-hmm. took
time out to recognize the enduring commitments of the Civil Rights Revolution.
So they basically, by not reformulating it, they made a clear statement that it didn't need to be reformulated because it was
after a lot of evidence.
Okay. So now the Supreme Court has taken it upon itself to say, look, we told you so, and now we're going to do this.
That's right, to say that it's unconstitutional when there is something in the Constitution of the United States. Now, Justice Ginsburg, you see, wrote a very fine opinion. She did not raise this point, but she wrote a very fine opinion, elaborating in a compelling way. This is more her style. This is fine.
Mm-hmm.
This is more her style, in a compelling way, what the record showed. And why it was wrong for the 5 in the majority to ignore what the record showed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's perfectly fine, So I don't fault Justice Ginsburg and the dissenters very much for trying to say, look, Congress did this in a thoughtful way. And the Supreme Court lacks the authority simply to second guess Congress. But I'm throwing something more into the hopper, on the, I was just sitting back and asking myself before we went on the air, what could I actually add to the conversation?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you've already pointed out something which I haven't heard anywhere else. So
rather than simply, vent in one way or another. Now, it is also true, you see, to move this thing on, that the Supreme Court, while when we look back and ask ourselves, what are the central achievements of the Civil Rights Revolution? Number one is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which established a completely new order of racial equality in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
It destroyed Jim Crow in a way the Supreme Court could never do in restaurants and public places.
Mm-hmm.
And the Voting Rights Act of 65 and the Fair Housing Act of 68. It's these which are the great triumphs of the mobilized, self-conscious joining of the civil rights movement with Lyndon Johnson and a bipartisan coalition of Democrats and Republicans. And so it's a very serious thing for the first time in 50 years for the Supreme Court to say something that is, at the root of the modern law of equality in this country is unconstitutional.
Well, not only that, obviously this is the major point, but not only that, if anybody needed any reminding of the fact that we needed this law in the first place, the last year's behavior of these very states and other states have reaffirmed for anybody who doesn't even know much about it why we need this.
Yes.
And in the face of that,
one can only hope. I don't know whether it would, as I said, in fact, the Supreme Court's decision is fixable.
Well, they essentially sent it to Congress, didn't they?
Right.
Usually they send things back to lower courts. They sent this one to Congress.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's fixable. The Supreme Court should not have done this, and it doesn't. And of course, Clarence Thomas, I didn't mention this, writes an opinion which tries to condemns the entire idea of putting states with a record of racial discrimination in voting under a special federal regime.
Well, that man is so completely beyond my understanding that maybe another generation later will be able to figure him out.
But the majority does not eliminate this as a possibility.
Well, let me move on because there's a couple of other issues, and some of them are connected. They had an affirmative action case, and maybe you can address that briefly because it turned out what they did was they kind of punted it down the field, right?
You got it right. And you see, one large question, which of course both the key case, which is the Voting Rights Act case, and Fisher suggests, is Fisher setting things up for in 3 or 4 years another decision? It's the status of the civil rights revolution is very much in question. It would be a tragedy to erase this from the law books. The work of an entire generation. Our parent, I actually was a young guy during the time, but the real triumph, the political triumph of your listeners' parents and grandparents is being threatened. Now, to tick off a couple of other cases, but Fisher really doesn't amount to much. That is the
affirmative action. Yeah, okay, so basically,
we'll it's tea leaf reading, and we'll see what.
But as you mentioned, what people are interpreting from this is that sooner or later, and possibly sooner, there'll be another case with a much stronger decision, right?
Well, and notice, you see, it's very much up to two people: Chief Justice Roberts, number one, and Anthony Kennedy, number two. Now, if you recall, contrast this decision on the voting rights case to Obamacare.
You
see. Now, if you read the opinions in Obamacare, 5 justices, Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts included, really assault the foundations of the New Deal revolution of Franklin Roosevelt. I don't have to get into details, but they really challenge it. But Chief Justice Roberts, right in the middle of an election year, showed restraint. He understood that if the 5 had the courage of their convictions, and Obama won, we would have some kind of real confrontation between the President Obama and the Supreme Court of the United States, and he was a statesman. He thought wisely that we don't need this.
You're talking about Roberts now.
That's right. But this time, he could have done the same thing. This was by no means a required decision, as I'm suggesting to your listeners. The Constitution of the United States points in the directly opposite direction.
Let us.
But he didn't do that. He is moving on.
He seems more like a politician than a lot of other chief justices that I've observed in my time or read about.
Well, I don't know about that. I think that, when you say politician, I think that you need some statesmanship from the Supreme Court. But the fact of the matter is that he's now shifting into gear here, and this is a very serious decision. Now, I do want to throw in a couple of other cases under the Civil Rights Act of '64, which are troubling, and which also came down very recently. The more striking one, I suppose, is Vance against Ball State University. Now, this 5-4 by Justice Alito, the same 5, the same 4. Miss Vance is basically serves food for Ball State University, and is a day-to-day. There is a supervisor who tells her what to do.
Right.
And she's alleged to be harassing Miss Vance. Miss Vance is a black person. The question is whether, if it's true, Ball State University is liable. Answer: she is. Ball State University is liable if the supervisor is, if the person who orders her around is understood to be a quote-unquote supervisor.
Right. It's a definition of who is and what is a supervisor. Right.
So, the 5-4, her supervisor wasn't a supervisor because even though she bossed her around every day, she did not have the power to fire her or transfer her or discipline her.
That is really dishonest.
Once again, what we're seeing is an ungenerous construction of one of the great achievements of the civil rights generation. If one viewed this in the spirit of Martin Luther King.
Yeah, to overthrow that on a technicality is what
that's right.
Yeah, I mean that's really petty and
meaningful to millions of people.
Yeah.
If it is just because she's bossing you around, that doesn't make her your supervisor, right? If that means then that you have to show that the university, and this was Ball State University, was negligent, you say, well, that's much harder to do. But in the social world in which we live, a person who bosses you around is and harasses you and makes your life miserable at work. That's what the Civil Rights Act is about.
Well, it just seems to me, coward. Like you mentioned this before when you were talking about why don't they come right out and say it. It's cowardly to use a little technicality or a little tiny little backwoods, rerouting of things, not to just face
cowardly.
They're not facing it straight up. They're not saying what they mean.
They are saying what it's being. It is sort of not appreciating the significance of these great acts of the American people. This is, the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was the culmination of a decade of struggle.
But apparently, you're being so polite and so generous in your use of language. These people, you say they're not appreciating it. They're doing more than not appreciating it. They're telling you to your face, America that is, that they don't like it. They don't believe it ever should have been enacted, and we want to see it gone. That's what they're doing.
That's too strong, but
really,
it isn't too strong so far as the voting. No, that's too strong. But it doesn't make it any less serious.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, however they put it,
because these people are basically failing to recognize the that it was that what they're doing is they're looking back to the civil rights revolution,
Mm-hmm.
and rather than interpreting it as a great achievement of the American people,
Mhm.
they're looking at it like the tax code.
Yeah, but I insist
and there's a
that
tremendous contrast here between that and, let's say, if they are, when they look at the original founding of the American Constitution in
Right.
1787 and 89, they look at these provisions and they, whatever you want to say about their in particular interpretations, they see them as they read these provisions not like the tax code, but as a fundamental statement of the American people. Well, the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65 are equally fundamental achievements of the American people. The only difference is that they happened more recently.
that's right. And so is the 14th Amendment, because we had a little item called
Absolutely,
the
a little
civil.
accident here.
Yeah.
So it's the we've had two reconstructions. The first reconstruction failed 50 years later as a result, in significant part, of unsympathetic interpretations of the Supreme Court of the United States.
Right.
Now, that's the question for the House today. Are we going to be seeing the same thing happening in the next 10
Well, look at the current construction of the House of Representatives. I mean, sending it back to Congress, I insist that they're disingenuous because sending it back to this Congress, first of all, they know better, and secondly, they knew as soon as they issued this decree that the very next second after it hit Twitter or whatever, that the secretaries of state and whoever, or the Justice Departments of various attorney generals of various states were going to be proposing or enacting rules. They're going to go straight against all of the achievements and they knew this when they issued this decision.
But
They knew it.
I want to say, I mean, we shouldn't we shouldn't overstate the. I mean, it's very serious. But on the other hand, first,
it's remediable.
What Holder will do,
yeah,
is we still have tools under Section 2 and 3 of the Voting Rights Act,
Mm-hmm.
and so it is still possible with more resources, more complexity, to strike down these assaults on the vote, on poor and underprivileged people and old people who don't have driver's licenses and things like that. Moreover, there is something called the 24th Amendment, another not your favorite. Everybody doesn't memorize it, but this I've studied a great deal, and it was passed enacted into the Constitution in 1964, and it declares poll taxes and similar things unconstitutional. And I'm on record as arguing, and this will be argued, I can assure you, that these motor voter registration laws, these requirements that somebody who doesn't have a driver's license have to spend 4 or 5 hours of his or her time.
That's a poll tax.
Is a poll tax.
I agree.
So that's why Attorney General Holder still has a lot of tools that he will use on these big ticket items.
Let me.
It's really going to hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see what's going to happen. But the thing that's really going to hurt is a lot of low-level things which the Justice Department would prevent usually, like last-minute changes at polling places. Which, by the way, we instead of having 12 polling places in minority areas, we can only have 3.
Well, they're already enacting this in Texas. So listen,
these low-level things are going to be much tougher to get than this campaign for forcing everybody to have spend.
Well, I really want to move ahead to the Defense of Marriage Act, and first we'll have to we're talking to Professor Bruce Ackerman, the Sterling Professor of Law and Political Science at Yale, and has written many books. The most important, I shouldn't say most important, but the most extensive is a multi-volume constitutional history, and another volume coming out in February, right?
That's right.
Called We the People. And we're going to talk after this. We're going to take a break now, and we're going to talk about the Defense of Marriage Act when we come back. And I'm sure that the decision that they made on the Voting Rights Act, they really didn't have any idea, because, they were busy sitting in their chambers, what kind of effect it would have on the rest of the country in a real way on black voters. They couldn't have known that, so I don't blame them. We're going to take a break, and we're going to come back. We'll talk about the Defense of Marriage Act.
The Agenda, making headlines.
By not believing in the legitimacy of the presidency. They don't believe in your vote, that you have a right to speak. They believe your view is so illegitimate that it should be discounted. And fundamentally, that is what has broken our system.
The Agenda, with Ari Ravenhoft of Media Matters. Weeknights, 9 East, 6 West on Sirius XM Left, 127. Or listen on the Sirius XM app. Sirius XM Left, 127. Responsibility.
I would like to see Congress work together instead of separately.
Expect more. Sirius XM Left, 127.
Okay, we're back. This is Mike Fader with Professor Bruce Ackerman, and we're talking about some decisions in the recent term of the Supreme Court. Don't forget, if you have opinions about any of this, or have any questions you want to ask me, or statements about any of this, go to my website and you can contact me or get in touch with me. It's Fader Files, FEDERFILES.com. So let's move on to the court. I'm reading a lot of this off SCOTUS. You know what SCOTUS, obviously. Sure. The SCOTUS is, for people who don't know, it's called capital letters SCOTUS. It's, if you're interested in anything the Supreme Court does, arguments, briefs that are submitted, they're interpreted in clear English. It's a great website to go to. I forget exactly what the website is, but it's called SCOTUS, SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, and it'll give you background and up-to-date information every day on things that are being considered and everything else that goes on with the Supreme Court. And so I'm reading this from a SCOTUS blog, sort of. The court issued its very conservative voting rights ruling on same-sex marriage a day before its very liberal decision, striking down part of the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, which prohibited the federal government from recognizing same-sex marriages. So the Defense of Marriage Act, maybe you could state what the Defense of Marriage Act said and what the Supreme Court, what part of that the Supreme Court struck down and the effect it's had.
Well, the Defense of Marriage Act imposed a general definition of marriage on all federal programs. Marriage was going to be between a man and a woman, regardless of what any particular state said marriage was. So that's and the Supreme Court struck down this uniform imposition of a traditional definition of marriage, making it therefore dependent upon what the particular state's definition of marriage was going to be in order to obtain a federal one or another advantage or disadvantage. So in the particular case, there was this legally married couple in New York, two women, and one died, and the question was whether the remaining spouse could inherit without paying an inheritance tax. Under DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, the answer was she was not married, regardless of what New York State said, because she was married to another woman. And therefore, she had to pay, let's say, I think it was like $340,000 in inheritance tax, while if she had been, and that's what 5-4 the Supreme Court held unconstitutional, that if it was a legal marriage in New York, then she could inherit without, in this particular case, paying an inheritance tax.
So in essence, what they're saying is they're throwing it back, and they're saying that the state determines.
That's right.
Right. Okay.
That's what the rule is. And that means, of course, let's say that if now you are legally you're an American citizen, and you are legally married to you're married to a Mexican, let's say, and you got married in Mexico City, or no, maybe that wouldn't be right. You were married in New York, then your spouse can then get privileged treatment for citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing.
Okay. And then other things that have to do with Social Security.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you could imagine there are just
all the federal benefits.
10,000 federal programs, at least, in which this is important.
So in this case, well, we have something fascinating is we have Kennedy is the one who's the linchpin here, right?
That's right. That's right. As I said, the key actors are in this kind of thing, or Kennedy or Roberts. Roberts more generally. Kennedy has a particular view on these questions having to do with gender, but in general, he's a rather predictable conservative.
Mm-hmm.
In any event, the opinion is a mess, I should tell you. Justice Scalia wrote an extremely harsh opinion for the four dissenters. Chief Justice Roberts sort of dissociating himself a bit from it.
And what did Scalia say? Because I read this, but I'm interested in other people hearing what Scalia said, because he's the harshest of them all.
Well, but I think that it's actually rather justified in this case. You see, because what Kennedy is straining to do,
mm-hmm.
I mean, the most attractive part of Kennedy's opinion is his emphasis on real-world humiliation. He explicitly says, you see, what about the children of these couples?
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is really humiliating them to say that their loving parents are somehow rather illegitimate,
mm-hmm.
which is something, of course, that everybody recognizes if you're in society. And it's just that kind of thing which the Supreme Court didn't recognize when, in that case, having to do with the woman who is serving and has a boss who orders her
right.
around but doesn't have the legal power to transfer.
How's that for humiliation?
Yeah. But here, Kennedy is very much onto the idea that withholding the status from people who are a loving couple condemns them to a life of humiliation. Well, if that's true, that makes all state laws, as well as the Federal Act, unconstitutional. Right?
Mm-hmm.
If that's a violation of equal protection or the equal protection component of the Due Process Clause or whatever mumbo-jumbo you'd like, legal label you'd like to stick it on, so Scalia says, well, if that's what you think, why are you only invalidating, why are you taking such pains to only write an opinion that will only attack DOMA?
There's plenty of other things that humiliate people.
That's right.
Yeah.
But it isn't only, but if it's the marriage relationship, if the federal government is, insisting on that marriage is between a man and a woman, and people find this humiliating in one or another context, well then, that's equally true when the states refuse to let you be married.
Well, also, I guess what you're saying is that Justice Kennedy could have found far better and stronger reasons to strike this down.
But that's what he doesn't want to do, you see.
Why?
Well, that's a good question. So he has 7 or 8 pages on, the federal government here is intruding upon the traditional function of the states. It's up to the states to decide what marriage is. And here the federal government is deciding what marriage is. Well, the federal government has indeed been defining what marriage is for centuries in one or another respect. So that really doesn't help them out too much, says Justice Scalia. Well, so you spend 8 pages on how it's traditionally a state function, but that's not what you say. That's not the reason you give for declaring this law unconstitutional. You say that this law is a violation of human dignity. Well, if this is right, well, then you really should go much more broadly. So the opinion itself has this, what in the world is he really talking?
Yeah, let me
hate to be so much of a lawyer in this conversation.
No, that's okay, but let me interrupt you for a second.
What is it? What is the unconstitutional feature?
Hold it. I have to interrupt you for a second, just to let you know that we only have about 3 minutes to the hour left.
Okay.
So, I'm just letting you know that, so go ahead.
Right. So, this opinion is pretty incoherent. It has a liberal result. But it does leave an awful lot to the future. By far, I would say and it certainly plays an important function in the ongoing debate. The Supreme Court saying that this is a form of institutionalized humiliation, which is incompatible with human dignity, even though we're not going to carry out it to its, this point to its obvious implication, which is to ban to go after the 39 states that still make it illegal to have a marriage. So
I guess what you're suggesting is that he could have found far stronger, more durable, and expandable.
He doesn't have the courage of his convictions.
All right. So in other words, he could have. He wants to do something, but he doesn't.
So the result is, legally speaking, quite a mess.
I see, because states can use some of this, and I think that's happening in California, in San Diego.
Right.
I think that the clerk of whoever it was, the legal officer.
Well, but it's the other 39. There are 11 states, I think, at last count, that make that allow same-sex marriages, but the other 39 don't.
Well, he should have based.
If it's a violation of human dignity for the federal government to insist on man-woman marriages as the only legitimate kind. If that's unconstitutional, why isn't it equally unconstitutional for the 39 states to do it?
Yeah, he should have based it on the concept of equality.
Well, he sort of does, but
sort of
doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay, so to sum up, the critical thing is the legacy of Martin Luther King. This is a significant, but one step in the unfolding story of freedom for people who are gay and lesbian and transgendered. But it's just one step. While the idea that the Supreme Court of the United States turns its back on the legacy of Martin Luther King, that's really something which will go down in the history books.
All right, I'm afraid we are at the end of the hour, and
talking to you.
I love talking about this stuff. I could talk about it for several hours, but Sirius won't let me do.
Even pay me to talk about this stuff. It's great.
Maybe you could pay me to talk about this stuff, and we'll be equal, and we won't be humiliated.
Right.
Okay, we got to go. All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Right.
All right, that's it for this hour. We'll be back after 7 o'clock. At 7 o'clock, I am going to, after 7 o'clock news, I will read you the press release that Sirius issued talking about the changes in Sirius Left 127 that some of you may be interested in because you listen to Sirius Left 127. Now, I hope I didn't. Did I bring this with me? Hold on a second. Yes, I do. I have the press release. So this is after 7 o'clock news. And then there's plenty of other stuff to talk about that's happened in the news recently and other issues that I cut out, other interesting stories from the paper. For instance, a town in Colorado has officially offered a $1,000 bounty to anyone who shoots down a federal drone. That's taking the law into your own hands. And I say, good for them. God bless America, you know? Those things are flying over you. You don't like them? Well, you get out your old trusty 6-shooter or your rocket launcher, and you can shoot it down. You'll be back.
Left Jab on Sirius XM Left.
You should be an American citizen to be able to vote in this nation. And it should be easy for you to vote. President Clinton was the one who got the motor voter law passed, and it makes so much sense. I am biased. I'm a progressive. I'm a Democrat. I think we're right. But you know what? This is brass-knuckled power politics, and people in power are going to want to cut the rules whichever way favors them.
Left Jab. Sundays at 7 p.m. East, 4 West. On Sirius XM Left. 127.
AP Radio News. I'm Carlotta Bradley. In Los Angeles,
what do we want? Justice! When do we want justice?
Protesters at a Justice for Trayvon rally, one of about 100 organized across the country, a week after George Zimmerman was found not guilty in Trayvon Martin's killing in Florida. In Miami, an official with the Trayvon Martin Foundation says there's a growing consensus to change that state's self-defense law.
We need to tell the people that in Tallahassee, this world, even our president recognizes the fact that the stand our ground law needs to be shut down.
Cooler temperatures in Southern California have helped firefighters make some progress against a 42 square mile fire in the mountains near Palm Springs. CAL FIRE spokesman Edwin Simpson.
The cooler temperatures made working conditions out there more tolerable, and a little bit of rise in RH will decrease the fire behavior.
The Forest Service says the fire is now 25% contained. The Transportation Security Administration is expanding its pre-check program for air travelers.
Under the existing guidelines for the TSA's pre-check program, only travelers who were members of frequent flyer programs with some air carriers were eligible for expedited screening. But TSA Administrator John Pistol says beginning later this year, U.S. citizens will be able to sign up for expedited screening online or by visiting an enrollment site to provide identification, fingerprints, and an $85 enrollment fee. Currently, about 12 million people are enrolled for expedited screening. The TSA expects another 3 million people to sign up by the end of the year. Mike Gracia, Washington.
Police have fired a water cannon in downtown Istanbul to disperse an anti-government demonstration. The clash happened after hundreds of people tried to enter a park to hold a wedding ceremony for a couple that had reportedly met during last month's protest against the Turkish Prime Minister's rule. This is AP Radio News. A handful of top Democratic candidates for mayor of New York City will spend the night at a public housing project in Harlem. Julie Walker explains.
As of Saturday, 5 candidates had committed to spending the night with host families at the Lincoln Houses complex in Harlem, where many residents complain about shabby conditions. Participants include Christine Quinn, Anthony Weiner, Bill de Blasio, Bill Thompson, and John Liu. The unusual campaign event was organized by the activist group Community Voices Heard. Julie Walker, New York.
Apple has bought online mapping services Hopstop and Locationary as part of its ongoing efforts to create a more affordable alternative to Google's navigation system. The acquisitions give Apple more tools to round out the maps that it embeds in the mobile operating system running its iPhones and iPads. I'm Carlotta Bradley, AP Radio News.
I mean, just as a matter of reference. Okay, so we're on the air, and we're on Sirius XM Left 127. But Sirius XM Left 127, boys and girls, for all of you regular listeners, is going to be changing next week. You know, like a vampire changes or a werewolf. And that's probably the wrong way to put it, right? Sirius XM Left 127, as of Monday, July 22nd, is going to be called Sirius Progress. You want to write this down? You want to remember this? Sirius XM Left 127 will be history as of midnight tomorrow night. At 12:01, that is to say July 22nd, Monday morning, in the middle of the night, it will become magically Sirius Progress. So that's it from now on. That's how it is. So Sirius XM Left becomes Sirius Progress, and that's... you keep reminding me. I always forget that. Sirius XM Progress, but it's still 127. The channel is still 127, so it's Sirius XM Progress 127. And I will read you the press release. Let's see. On July 22nd, Sirius XM Left becomes Sirius XM Progress, a 24/7 progressive political talk channel driven by veteran activists and dedicated to progressive politics, offering a powerful, diverse lineup of original thought, nuanced opinions, and inspiring political discussions. You heard it here first. Leading commentator, activist, and Sirius XM host Michelangelo Signorilli hosts the new afternoon show. Media Matters' Ari Robin-Haft sets progressive agenda on the new morning show. Sirius XM's Mark Thompson, long known for activism on behalf of the African American and progressive communities, will continue his early evening show on a daily basis. NAACP President and CEO Ben Jealous is scheduled to be one of Thompson's first guests during the launch week. Popular progressive hosts Stephanie Miller, Ed Schultz, Tom Hartman, and Tom Malloy. Tom Malloy. Do I know Tom Malloy? I thought it was Mike. It says here, I'm just reading what they wrote. Will also continue to be heard daily. I guess it was a misprint. Alongside Progress 127 will be its sister station, Sirius XM Progress Plus, which is available for subscribers listening via the Sirius XM Internet Radio app for smartphones and other mobile devices or online at SiriusXM.com. Progress Plus will feature The Bill Press Show live at 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern Time, The Tom Hartman Show live 3 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and The Mike Malloy Show live 9 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. And it says, among other progressive political programming. I think that's where I fit in. I'm part of the other progressive political programming. I'm other, yes. Sirius XM Progress program will be available on Sirius XM On Demand after it airs for subscribers listening via the Sirius XM Internet Radio app or online, et cetera, et cetera. So I will continue on this spot Saturdays from 5 to 8 p.m. Eastern on Sirius Progress, Sirius XM Progress, and I think that's it. And there might be some minor changes for me in terms of when my rebroadcasts are on. If you want to find out more about this, then you should go to Sirius, to the website, or to find Sirius Progress and see if you can find yourself the exact program grid. And that way you'll know who's on, who's off, when people have been moved to, and that's that. If you want to call up and ask me anything about this, feel free, except that I don't know anything about it. I am actually not on the board of directors of Sirius, and I am not on the programming committee at Sirius. I have no idea why they changed it or moved things around. Obviously, they have their reasons. So that's the way it is now. And so you know, it's important for you to know that. What else can I say about this? Nothing. That's it. So stay tuned, and we'll see what it sounds like. Changes. We have changes in the air here. Other things. What did I mention before? I wanted to mention this again. This thing about shooting the drones down is fascinating to me. I mean, this is at the same time a combination of the feeling that almost all of us have about these disgusting drones, which are part of the corporate police state, but in fact, just the police state in general that we're living in, and the way America displays its arrogance and its murderous intent all over the world by blowing up people, often innocent men, women, and children, with these remote-controlled drones, right? And the federal government now uses hundreds of drones currently, as I'm speaking, They fly hundreds of drones over the border, although they've temporarily ceased for some reason because public opinion is getting very nasty about it, flying too many flights over the border with Canada and with Mexico. But there are drones used by police departments now. There will be more drones. In 5 years, there will be 10,000 drones used by state and federal police, by various federal agencies. The sky will be full of these things. And it's a sign of very bad things to come, obviously. Now, what's interesting to me is, and this article I'm going to read you here, it's a combination of this kind of American rugged individualism, which results in everybody who's a Second Amendment fundamentalist thinking they have a right to carry 52 weapons and to shoot anybody they want. And you can see this from Trayvon Martin to people walking down the streets of towns on purpose with their AR-15s just to show they can do it, right? And it also combines people on the left, progress people, you could call them. It combines people like me and people like that because I hate these drones. Now, you can't shoot down. Obviously, if you shoot down a U.S. government drone, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. Not to mention the fact that the drone might take a look at you after your rifle bullet or whatever you got bounces off the side of the drone and may decide to turn you into little tiny atoms right there on the spot. So, but here's what it says. Normally, if you shot down an aircraft owned by the federal government, you'd be in trouble. Yes, I'd say so. But a small Colorado town named Deer Park is looking to carve out an exception, proposing $100 bounty. You don't get much. $100 bounty to any hunters who shoot down unmanned drones that appear to be owned or operated by the United States federal government. Right on. The ordinance would be, you have to be part of the NRA for this. The ordinance would also require a drone hunting license issued after a background check and a $25 fee. So you get the same time you take out, let's say, a duck hunting license or a license to hunt moose or coyotes, you can also take out a drone hunting license. God bless America. The resident who drafted the ordinance, Philip Steele, was quick to say he doesn't expect many to cash in on the bounty. This is a very symbolic ordinance, Mr. Steele told local reporters. Basically, I do not believe in the idea of a surveillance society, nor should any of us in this country. It's inevitable that somebody would do something like this or say something like this. Sometime, someplace, somewhere in this country, somebody is going to shoot down one of these things because that's the way people feel about these things. They hate them, and they have every right to hate them. But while Deer Park hasn't seen any confirmed drone traffic yet, the idea is hardly far-fetched. The FBI has already admitted to using drones over U.S. soil. And Customs and Border Protection recently stepped up its drone missions over both the Mexican and Canadian borders. Beyond federal agencies, the FAA has cleared 300 local agencies for drone use. God knows who this is. It could be the fire department. It could be the local poultry inspection department. It's going to be flying drones. You're going to look up in the air in 5 or 10 years in this country, and these things are going to be flying and making noise. I guess they're silent. They're going to be flying all over the place. It's going to look like an invasion of giant locusts every time you wake up all day long and all night long. They're going to be surveilling you. Probably, the Department of Motor Vehicles will have a drone to find out if your license expired. Even if Deer Park doesn't end up with many drone sightings, the ordinance will still work as a tourist stunt, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to have drone-themed skeet shooting festivals and whatever. So, American ingenuity. There we go. And if one other thing I wanted to mention, and then I'm interested in getting some calls on the issues we were talking about tonight. Voting Rights Act, DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act, which is struck down, and or a section of it. Basically, what they did is send it back to the states and let the states make up their minds. And you can see what's happening. Despite what Professor Ackerman said earlier, I see malicious intent, or I certainly see intent in everything the Supreme Court does. These people are not idiots. They don't have their heads in the sand, clearly. Whenever they issue a ruling, they know very well, whoever is in the 5-4 majority, exactly what's going to happen. When they issued the ruling discrediting the formula, which has been built up and needs to have been put in place for like a couple of 100 years, when they issue this Supreme Court the decision on voting rights, discrediting the formula for how states should be supervised because they're bigoted when it comes to voting. When they did that, in a second, Texas immediately instituted a very severe voter ID act. Every state that wants to do this, and there are dozens of them across the country, including some in the Midwest and one or two up north, they right away are going to do this. You're going to find out within a month that every single one of these voter ID things that the Justice Department interfered with, that the courts temporarily put holds on before the last election, they're going to be at this times 100. And it's going to cost the government, a lot of money to track them down, to argue with them, to take these cases to court. They're going to have to go through the courts again. What's going to happen is, because of what the Supreme Court did, and I believe they did with malicious intent, these five assholes, what they're going to do is, what's going to happen is now that immediately, within the next election, the next congressional election and the next presidential election, it won't be corrected until after that. So there's going to be voter ID laws which are bigoted against students, against people who are generally progressive, to use a certain word, or left-wing or Democrats, and black voters, all of whom generally vote for their Democratic Party. They are going to have a much, much harder time voting if they can vote at all. Everything you saw in the last election, people waiting on lines for 6 hours, people having to travel who don't have driver's license, having to go buy them just to be able to vote. Voter IDs for people, who find it very difficult to even get a voter ID. All of this prejudicial, clearly bigoted behavior and directed towards one political party, not that I care about that party so much. All of this is going to keep happening in the next couple of elections, federal elections, before Congress and the president get around to correcting it. But as Mr. Ackerman said, the Justice Department, Mr. Holder, has plenty of tools and opportunities to spike the guns of this decision even before these state laws are enacted. But it's going to be a lot harder for him to do it. So it's just pure bigotry and malice on the part of the Supreme Court, those five people in the Supreme Court. So here's another thing I wanted to mention, just another issue. When we talked, somebody called up earlier and talked about income inequality. That is really at the root of everything that's wrong with America. When you got Alex Rodriguez, this big, dishonest, steroid-using buffoon son of a bitch, making $25 million, who can't even hit anymore, to throw into the bargain, they sent him down to the minor leagues. He's playing on a Yankee farm team in Reading, Pennsylvania. The country, the area around there is so depressed that the average income of a family, not just a person, a family, which has to feed and clothe, children, which has to rent a house or pay a mortgage or whatever, on $27,000 a year. You know what that means, right? Alex Rodriguez makes $25 million a year. So it's not just the government. It's not just them. There is income inequality, but part of the problem is that the entire American public, in a way, passively or actively goes along with this. In other words, we're all to blame in a way, or most of us, I should say, are to blame. Anytime you watch a baseball game, and in my case, I'm to blame too, I'll watch a hockey game. There's hockey players who haven't graduated from high school, who can barely speak, who are 18 and 19 years old that make $700,000 a year in the NHL. And every time I watch TV, I'm contributing to that, because the commercials that pay these teams in the National Hockey League, the commercial spots where the money flows into these teams, comes from basing on how big the audience is. I haven't purchased a ticket to an NHL game. I don't have the money. I don't have the money to even sit, in the nosebleed seats. I don't have that much money. Nobody can buy a ticket for a professional sports game anymore unless you know somebody or you're making a lot of money. It's basically classed everybody out. But it's all income inequality. And the income inequality for celebrities, sports figures, for other people, the fact that the Americans let CEOs of corporations that they have stock in get away with this, you can't just ascribe it to rich people as if they just invaded the country and took it over. A lot of America allowed this to happen and keeps allowing it to happen. These outrageous salaries paid to sports figures, to celebrities, the fact that we let rich people get away with almost anything, is a lot of it is the fault of the American electorate and the American public. So people have to be aware. They have to wise up to this. Now, speaking of income inequality, Here's another thing. McDonald's, this is from a website called Think Progress. McDonald's tells its workers to budget by getting a second job and turning off their heat. Now listen to this. And I have this right in my hand here. McDonald's has partnered with Visa to launch a website to help its low-wage workers making an average of $8.25 an hour to budget. They're going to help you budget, McDonald's and Visa. But while the site is clearly meant to illustrate that McDonald's workers should be able to live on their meager wages, it actually underscores, of course, how hard it is for a low-paid fast food worker to get by. And fast food workers just recently at McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts in New York are starting to try to organize and go on strike, just like at Walmart's. And so we'll see what happens in that. The website set up by Visa and McDonald's includes a sample budget journal for McDonald's employees that offers a view of how they can save money and how they should spend their money. Now listen to this. I'm getting this straight from the website. If you're working at McDonald's making $8.25 an hour, right? This is your monthly net income. It says first job, $1,105. That's your job at McDonald's. Then it says income, second job, $955. These people at McDonald's, after you're working and sweating all day long, standing up in this nasty kitchen or serving people on your feet all day long at McDonald's, they expect you to go out and get another job. So first job, $1,105. Next job, second job, $955. It says other income, $0. Yeah, right. Monthly net income total, $2,060. Now here's your monthly expenses according to McDonald's and Visa. This is what you should be doing. You should listen very carefully. Savings, $100. Savings on $2,060 a month in the United States of America in 2013. Save $100 a month. Mortgage and rent, $600. Mortgage and rent, $600. Car payment, $150. Car home insurance, $100. Car or home insurance. Health insurance, $20. Heating, $0. So if you're a McDonald's worker, you can fucking freeze to death according to this budget. There's no money in this budget that they're allowing you for heating. Cable and phone, $100. You have to be able to watch Bridesmaid, right? Electric, $90. Other, $100. Other, maybe that's including clothes. Could that be clothes or gasoline for your car? Unbelievable. Monthly expenses total, $1,260. I guess other includes food and clothing and everything else. And that's $100 a month. Monthly expenses total, $1,260. Monthly spending money is $800. That's over and above these other meager things that they allow you to spend on. Daily spending money goal, $27. So basically McDonald's and Visa, which partner with McDonald's, are telling you that you don't have to have heat, clothes, repairs to anything, and you don't have to have food. And that's how you can get along on that budget. It's not bad. Maybe they assume that you're going to be eating, chicken and fried, French fries and salads at McDonald's, and you don't have to worry about the rest of this, and burgers. Anyhow, so that's so all of you people out there, you might want to follow this budget. Just check it out online, and no problem. You just don't get clothes, you don't get heating, and you don't get food. It's not a big deal. Income inequality, that is where we are in this country. There are too few people with too much money, and the rest of us hardly have enough to get by. And I'm talking about people who make $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year are just getting by sometimes. Just getting by, and not even getting that much health insurance, health care at that. However, the good news is that recently it's been discovered that under the Affordable Care Act, which actually should be Medicare for all, but it's not, under Obama's health plan, people who are going to buy their own health insurance will save a tremendous amount of money on health care and health insurance premiums over what they have to spend now. So it turns out to have been a good thing, although it's not what it should be, which is Medicare for all. So I guess that's all for now, and we'll go to some calls. And then remember what I said about calls earlier. Make your investment in this show and in America, I think, by calling up here. It's 866-997-4748. I don't want to hear necessarily from the same people again week after week. I mean, that's all very fine. You're nice people, but let's have some new people calling. If you're worried about calling, we'll just try to work through it. Can make you nervous to call a radio show. Don't worry about it, because I want everybody to get involved. I guess we should take a call, right? No. A new caller. A convert? I converted somebody? What, to Catholicism? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Who are we talking to? Kendall. Oh, Kendall, my favorite caller. What's up?
Hello. Yeah, you were talking about the drones. I was in the truck stop at the TA in Ontario, California, and they have a little shop inside the truck stop that was selling radio-controlled stuff. And they had a little radio-controlled helicopter with a mile range and a camera.
Wow, really?
For $300, anybody's teenage kids could fly this remote-controlled helicopter over your house and watch your wife sunbathe. I wonder what a couple $1,000 would get you.
I mean, what do you think? Do you think a thing like that should be illegal?
Yeah, I do. I like my privacy. We couldn't be further apart politically, but I completely agree with you on the NSA stuff. I completely agree with you on Obama on a lot of things. Your first guest, the only thing he failed to mention was that 2 billion rounds of ammunition Homeland Security's acquired.
Yeah, that's true.
You got to wonder what the hell do they need that for?
Well, I think we're going to find out.
That's for us. I mean, that's kind of hard to argue.
Yeah, I think that the sale of any motorized flying vehicle that has a camera attached to it should be absolutely forbidden by federal law.
Yeah, that's $300 will get you a helicopter with a mile range and a camera.
Absolutely amazing.
Like I said, what would $2,000 get you? I mean.
Yeah, well, maybe $2,000 will get you an armed predator drone to go take out your high school principal because you don't like going to school anymore. I don't know. This is really crazy. I mean, Kendall, that's amazing. That's an amazing. I didn't know it was getting that bad out there.
Oh, and that was at the truck stop at the TA in Ontario. I mean, I'm sure that's jacked up prices too. I'm sure if you go to mall someplace, you could get something better, cheaper.
That's right. It's a sad development. It really is. I mean, it seems as if all these technical things that they develop, there's no way that people are going to stop using them. Whatever it is, no matter how much it interferes with us or intrudes on us, people will keep using them unless somebody gets together and stops them. I don't know.
I'm almost praying for an EMP pulse. I mean, if the technology exists, it will be used. And there's no way to stop it. I mean,
well, it's got to be a way to stop it. Unless we want to live in a complete and utter police state, somehow some combination of citizens, right, left, and middle, are going to have to get together and make them stop doing it. I noticed that the government is somewhat backing off on a lot of this NSA stuff and pursuing reporters, but not enough, not at all enough. They're backing off because people are angry at them. But the problem is that the people in Congress are all part of the same group. They're just as much involved as the president and the executive in approving and overseeing and approving and budgeting money for all this spying. So they're just as much to blame. If we have to look towards our representatives in Congress to fight for our privacy, we're going to be looking in vain, I think, unless we elect some new people. I'm going to have to move on. Yeah.
Most of them are all the same thing. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. They're all the same thing.
It doesn't really matter anymore. Listen, I should move on. Take another call. Thanks, Kendall. Who do we have? Henry? Henry from Indiana. You're on the radio. Go ahead. You there, Henry? Did we lose him? Andy from Nebraska. Are you there?
Hi, Mike.
Hiya.
Hey, you gave me a guilty conscience. I haven't talked to you in a couple of years. But we are friends on that Facebook thing, you know.
That's good.
NSA company surveillance thing there. But hey, I wanted to ask you, I'd like to talk to that guy you're talking to about the Constitution, but, or the Supreme Court. I saw something yesterday about taking the right for reporters, they must now give up their sources by law.
Well, that's something that's in the middle of being argued constantly all the time. The latest was that there's a guy, this whole NSA thing got outed, I think it was about 2006, 2007, by a reporter from the New York Times named James Risen, Risen. He's a reporter from the New York Times and an author, and he was leaked information by an employee of the federal government, I think of the NSA or the CIA or something like that. He was leaked information about the fact that the NSA was tapping people's phones, especially reporters' phones. And Risen, this reporter, recently, federal appeals court ordered him to testify against the guy that the government says leaked this information. In other words, they're saying that reporters, this is going to wind up in the Supreme Court, reporters cannot protect their sources anymore. They have to testify against them. And that's what's going on right now. So what you're mentioning is up for grabs in the court system right now. Reporters are being forced, reporters are being jailed, and they're being forced to reveal their sources because Obama's administration is pursuing whistleblowers and leakers more and worse than any other combination of presidents in recent history. He does not want this stuff leaked, and he is extending the Justice Department's punishment phase straight to reporters. In other words, you can't do your job anymore unless you want to risk being thrown in jail because you received, like the New York Times, when they got the Pentagon Papers, according to the way Obama's administration is right now, they would have locked up the entire executive board and president of the New York Times for publishing the Pentagon Papers.
Right.
That's how it is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's happening now. Reporters have to be very worried about doing any real investigative reporting that involves the government now. They have to be worried about it now.
So basically, we get no reporting left anymore.
Well, see, that's what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the government will tell them, here's what you report on this, you know.
Yeah, they'll tell you. Yeah, this is safe to report on. This isn't. And this is what happens in a lot of other countries. You can't do it unless you want to risk your life. I mean, in Russia, people occasionally will report on something the government's doing, and then they disappear, or they get locked up for 20 years.
Yeah, well, in memory of Lou Samuels, we are so fucked.
Yeah,
that's just the way it is. You know.
Yeah,
thanks, Mike.
Yeah, Andy. Thanks for calling. If you wanna call up here, this is your chance to do it. This is and you can only call, by the way. This is the last time you will ever be able to call Sirius Left on this radio show. You will never again in your lifetime or your children's lifetime be able to call Sirius XM Left on this radio show because it won't be here anymore. It'll be Sirius Progress. So make history and call up. All right, so who do we have? Jason from Oregon, you're on the radio.
I had a question for you.
Sure.
A fundamental question about activism.
Mm.
And when I watch people and I see people discuss activism, it appears to me that they're too comfortable in their lives to engage in activism, or at least they're comfortable enough that they don't want to stick their necks out. What I want to ask you is how to reach out to these people and make them want to care. And I'll take my answer off the air because I got to go.
Okay. Now, there is a really difficult question. And obviously what we've seen, one of the reasons why I think the reason he's asking this question is because we've all observed a lot of people came out in the last several years to protest in hundreds of thousands in various places the planned invasion of Iraq. And I think there was close to 1 million people in 2 or 3 different cities that turned out. And there have been all these Occupy protests against this outrageous income inequality. The government is turning into a complete and utter corporate police state, and yet no one turns out on the street, no one demonstrates. All over the world, in Brazil, in Greece, in England, in Spain, pick out 5, 10, 20 more countries, some of them dictatorships. People are turning out in Turkey, they're turning out in Moscow, they're turning out everywhere, places where they risk their lives doing it. They risk their livelihoods. They could be tortured. They could be shot. They can be beat up without any laws protecting them. And this is happening all over the place, right? And they're turning out here all over the place, but they're not turning out in this country. Nobody, so much as more than a half a dozen people, are showing up at any rallies or protests anywhere. What is the reason for this, is what the caller asked. How do you get people to show up? I really don't know. This country probably has more entertainment devices, televisions, mobile devices, smartphones, iPads, ePads, LPads, tablets, video screens, staring people in the face all the time. People in this country are entertaining themselves into utter sheep-like passivity. The Romans are famous. The Roman Empire was famous for throwing bread at people and putting circuses on. They would literally entertain the mob in Rome and the crowds in Rome with gigantic circuses, and they would give free passes to the gladiatorial contests at the Colosseum. Right? You could sit on the 50-yard line for free, right? And you could watch people, stab each other to death, or lions tear Christians apart. And they would entertain people. They put on free celebrations, huge, where tens of thousands of people would come to these giant fields outside of Rome and celebrate. And it was on the tab of rich people or on the tab of the government itself, the emperor, right? And then they would they would throw loaves of free bread into the stands at the Colosseum and hand out free food to everybody. And this seemed to work. They learned the lesson that if you kept people entertained and you threw them some bread here and there, that they might generally shut up, and having all of their rights taken away, being arrested and being accused in secret, being just ridden down by the emperor's Praetorian Guard, which is basically what we have now. We call our police departments, was a Praetorian Guard. All of their rights, they have no rights whatsoever. They are seized. Their property is seized. They have nothing at all. And yet, as long as they were amused and entertained, the Romans learned this. The Nazis knew about this. Put on gigantic parades, military bands, banners, give everybody medals, give them uniforms, give every schlub and idiot and asshole and jerk off in the entire Third Reich a uniform, a medal, and a new pair of boots, and he's going to love you. And it worked. Works better in some countries than others. In this country, we are self-entertaining ourselves to death. People generally in this country have a cell phone. I've seen people in New York City. They are poor beyond, they have nothing. They're living on welfare. They're living maybe on food stamps, and if there still are any food stamps after the Congress got through. People have practically nothing, but they do have a TV, flat screen TV, and they do have a cell phone, and they do have a video game that they're playing with. Even if they hardly have the fare to get on a bus or buy food that day, they all seem to have some kind of device. Everybody in this country is driving something generally they shouldn't be driving, going on vacations to places they shouldn't even bother spending the money. I just got through wading through, as usual, every Saturday night, the gigantic crowds of people, even though it's 95 degrees here in Times Square in Manhattan, where the 95 degrees, and it's been that way for 4 days. It's astounding heat, and it's worse in the middle of the city because the heat gets trapped, right? There are still thousands of big, fat people with no brains and too much money in Times Square spending $80 on an M&M t-shirt, going into the Disney store and buying a Mickey Mouse figurine for $400 or some stupid, insane shit. The whole country is hypnotized by stuff, by things. They watch all this stuff. They spend money on all these devices. They buy things they don't need. The country's credit card debt is over $1 trillion. And soon, the credit card debt of the American public is going to make the home mortgage recession that was caused by the home mortgage situation. It's going to make it look like small potatoes, like loose change in your pocket. Student loans are like $1 trillion. But credit card debt is so overwhelming and will soon be so outrageous. There will be so many foreclosures and seizures, and so many people will have credit ratings that are near zero or whatever it is. It'll be so bad, the credit card debt, that it's not going to get paid back. And Americans live on this insane credit. Every minute they're watching they're playing with some device they can't afford. They are driving around in some vehicle they can't afford. They're doing something they can't afford. They overpay, they overspend as if there's no tomorrow. They have the plastic, they do it. The whole country is in trillions and trillions of dollars of debt, but they are amused. Everybody in this country is either drinking or taking a prescription drug or a non-prescription drug. probably half the country, including little children, are drugged and addled in their brains into being passive and to being out of it and to being high so that they don't pay any attention to the politics. We are all being boiled alive slowly like frogs in a pot without even realizing it, and finally we're just going to be boiled and dead. And this is the way things are. The guy asked me why people are doing this. He says, how do you reach out to people to let them know? I don't really know the answer, finally, to this question. The people in Occupy got out on the street and got beaten up by the cops, got pepper sprayed, got shot by rubber bullets, coated with pepper, some of it, so that they had open wounds. They got beaten down by police batons. Some of them are permanently injured. They got sprayed in the face, and you all saw the videos, college students, and nobody did anything about it. People in this country have turned into passive sheep. Passive sheep. I don't know. I come from an era, from a generation where in the 60s there was a draft, there was an immoral war, there were civil rights battles to be fought, and millions of people relentlessly would boycott companies. We would get out on the streets. We would be attacked by the police, or people would be thrown in jail. You would lose your job, and yet people did it over and over and over again. I don't know what the difference is, except to say, as I have been saying, that the availability of amusement devices, of video games, of TVs, of phones that light up and turn colors has hypnotized people into thinking that life is okay. And also, the amount of prescription drugs that are issued to people, sedatives, amphetamines like Ritalin, I think there's like 1 billion prescriptions a year written individually to tens of millions of people for sedatives and for other drugs that really keep people kind of passive. And people drink all the time. They take drugs. They get high. Probably, 10, 20 million people are getting high on pot. That's all very nice. It helps with medicinal things. It makes you feel good. It's okay with me. Meanwhile, everybody's high or they're amused. And we're turning into a police state, and nobody turns out to support the people in Occupy. I don't know how you reach people. I don't know how you reach people, except for this. When things get so bad, and they're getting that bad, that people are so poor that finally their electricity gets turned off. When tens of millions of people have their power shut off because they didn't pay their outrageous electric bill. When tens of millions of people aren't able to use their devices. When their flat screen TV stops working because the electricity got shut off, or because the cable bill was $500 a month and they couldn't afford it. When satellites maybe get old and aren't replaced, and suddenly something happens to the satellite system. When food stamps are really cut off completely, and there are tens of millions of people starving, and there are dead bodies in the streets. When the militarized police, with billions of dollars from Homeland Security and tanks and cannons and weapons given to them by the Army, by the Defense Department, when they get out on the street and they begin to routinely shoot to death, as in you see in other countries like in Turkey or Spain or other places, or Russia, when they routinely actually open up with live ammunition on innocent people at malls or at protests or at schools, when they start murdering hundreds, even thousands of American citizens, when people are starving to death, that is when people in America may wake up. By then, it might be too late. I don't know the answer. Otherwise, I don't know what to say. We're going to have to take a break right now. Speaking of pacifying your brains so you can't think, we need to go to a commercial break, and then I will be back.
Hey, this is Stormy Warren. You know, Sirius XM channels can now be personalized online to fit your taste with my SXM. Like my channel, The Highway. You can hear more twangy music. The Redneck Yacht Club. Or maybe more up-tempo tunes. How about more new country discoveries? Get more of what you want and less of what you don't with my SXM. For more details and a free trial of SiriusXM Internet Radio, go to SiriusXM.com/mySXM.
SiriusXM Left 127. Authentic.
Send everybody home and start all over again.
Expect more. SiriusXM Left 127.
Boy, it brings tears to my eyes to hear the announcer man say SiriusXM Left 127. 9 years I have given my all to SiriusXM Left 127, and what do I get? Serious progress. Yeah, the truth is, of course, the simple facts are that Sirius XM Left 127 will turn into Sirius Progress. Sirius XM Progress. I always forget the XM. I shouldn't do that. Sirius XM Progress 127 starting Monday morning. So be aware of that. And there are programming changes, and you should check out whatever grid is available online or to see who's on, who's off, and who's expanded and who's retracted and whatever. You'll check it out. Check the grid. Okay, who do we have? AJ.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, okay. That's you, Dad.
Hey.
That's you, Dad.
Thanks a lot. How you doing, Mike?
Okay, how you doing?
I'm good. It's funny. I'm sitting here listening to your show. I would catch you here and there. I'm a first-time caller. But it's a lot of things you said. It's like, wow, I say those things every day, being a teacher, as far as how we're entertained to keep us from knowing the real issues. The one thing that will set me off in my classroom and drive me nuts is to hear a kid say, I don't read or I don't want to watch news because it's boring, because it's feeding into everything. Like we're being dumbed down. I often say to myself, I don't care. I don't know if it's just me, but the average American is grossly misinformed, grossly uneducated, and highly superficial, hence a lot of debt. Even John Dickinson of the colony of Pennsylvania, before we became the United States, during the debate, during the Second Continental Congress, which eventually led to the Declaration of Independence, he even said that most men would rather protect the possibility of becoming rich instead of facing the reality of being poor, which made me, and I thought of that when you made the comment about how we as Americans have a tendency to allow the wealthy in the world to get away with a lot of the things they get away with. I just want to know what are your thoughts on that statement? Have we really come to that where everyone is ignoring what the wealthy does because they want to try to become wealthy themselves? Have we become that greedy as a society?
But it's not a new thing. As you point out, somebody mentioned that even before we had a country. And in the 1930s, John Steinbeck, the great writer who wrote The Grapes of Wrath, which is maybe one of the great books, Steinbeck himself was asked this question, and he said he thought that most Americans labor under the delusion that one day that they could be millionaires, and that's why they don't take it out on millionaires and redistribute the wealth, because they think they could have it one day themselves. It's our innate greediness, and it's our teaching in this country that we could all become rich one day. So that's why we buy into this,
Which I agree with that wholeheartedly, whereas it's almost like in some of my teaching classes, we students how to become employees instead of teaching them to own their homes. It's almost as if this police state, as you say, that we're headed toward. And I hate to admit that I have to agree wholeheartedly with that statement. We are leaning toward a police state because of how everything's being regulated in a manner where we're raising our kids to be subject to corporation.
And also, as a teacher, you have to be aware of the fact that students are routinely given drugs because they're found to be disobedient.
Not only, and that's I really hate that. There are some students they're very, very bright, and I have had some students who were misdiagnosed as attention deficit hyperactive disorder, and they end up on Ritalin or Adderall or whatever the medication may be, and they become zombies in my classroom.
As far as I'm concerned, this is not done deliberately from any central location to turn American kids into passive zombies so that the government can do it at once. And yet somehow it all seems to work out fine for the rich and the powerful this way.
It really, really does. And I know you got to take other calls.
I do.
I want to say this. It's clear that a lot of our higher-ups, it seems like either they are or maybe they're not doing their homework. Someone somewhere is not doing their homework because we're constantly creating a permanent underclass. We're going to be the French Revolution all over again. We're hollering for bread, but they're saying, hey, let us eat cake.
Well,
it's not going to work anymore.
That's right. You've got it absolutely right. And my answer to that is, to everybody who's listening and to anybody that you can talk to that listens, is question authority constantly. Question authority constantly. They don't necessarily know better than you. Sometimes they know less than you.
Not only do they know less, but they're just good at making it seem as if they know more.
All right, I'm getting a signal. I should move on to another call. All right, thanks for
a
calling.
lot, Mike. Take care.
Thank you. Who do we have? Dave from Michigan. You're on.
Yeah, I want to take up a lot of your time, Mike. But one of your callers mentioned drones, or you mentioned drones, and he was fascinated by the fact you can buy one for about $300 now that you can put over your neighbor's house.
Mm-hmm.
I've been model airplanes for years. We've been taking video from model aircraft for the last 12 years. The only thing that's taking place is miniaturization. Okay, now the next step that's coming are going to be devices, micro-miniature devices that will have the same capability. It'll be about the size of a hummingbird or smaller. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying this is right to observe people, but I'm just saying that technology is going to keep improving and improving and improving. So what we've got to concentrate on is, if you hear that your local county sheriff wants to get a drone to fly over the county, you've got to go to your county commissioners and say, why do we need this drone?
Mm-hmm.
With budget cuts, we don't have enough police on the street or whatever. You have to, like you say, you have to become active. You have to get involved. But you can't stop progress. You can't stop the market.
You can stop it, but you can control it. You can't stop it, but you can control it. And I think what you're saying really puts the finger exactly where it needs to be. Everything is going to have to be local. There is no way anymore that any citizen in this country can influence anything at a national level. But if you go to your town council, if you go to a city council meeting, if you go to the sheriff's office, if you go to the local Department of Sanitation or whatever it is, and tell them, look, I live here. All of us live here. If you can get a group of people together, we don't want this. We're going to vote this down. We are going to stand in the way of this. We're going to prevent this from happening. It all has to happen at a local level. It's out of control at the national level. It has to happen at the local level. That's where the truth is going to be enacted. That's where it's going to be reversed, if it ever gets reversed. Anyhow, I should
Yeah, you're exactly right. Listen, I enjoy your program. I'll get out of your way. Thanks for letting me take your time today.
Yeah, sure. No, I wish it could be a little longer, but since I asked for calls, I should give people more of an opportunity. In fact, we can take one more call for about 2 minutes. Who do we have? Dave in Ohio. We got 2 minutes for you, and then we're out of time. Go ahead. You there, Dave? No.
Hi.
Yeah, you there?
Yes, I am.
So speak.
I apologize.
No, that's all right.
I'm a war resistor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a former member of the United States military. From the years 2007 to 2008, I was going through training and completed my training, everything, got my deployment orders to go to Iraq, and I had moral reservations about not only the enormous amount of racism in the United States military that exists, just the systematic dehumanization of pretty much every Middle Eastern culture that exists over there.
Mm-hmm.
So I made the conscious decision to go to Canada, essentially, and I hooked up with the peace network up there, the anti-war network up there. It's called War Resistors.
Mm-hmm.
And you were mentioning earlier in the program about how all this rah-rah flag waving and just the automatic veneration of anything military for just the stupidest events. I think you brought up something about women's field hockey.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll have Marines on the field. I agree with you 100%. I understand there's a difference between respecting the profession of defending this country, but it has progressed to a certain point where anything military related has gone completely out of control. And I just wanted to say, whenever I hear something like that, I just think, I didn't ask you to go fight 2 illegal wars for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that I should automatically respect you just because you made a choice to be basically a sheep.
Mm-hmm.
to go kill for blood and oil, to go rape and destroy whole civilizations and cultures just because, a man behind a desk says, okay, I'll jump whenever this corporation says, to jump.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to express I really, really appreciate the fact that you recognize that the military-industrial complex has completely gone out of control, and the way that the military is handled these days. I just wanted to express my gratitude that you're bringing attention to that issue.
Well, I really appreciate your calling up, and it takes courage, I think, to do what you did. I'm going to have to stop because we're at the end of the hour, and thanks for calling.
Yeah, anytime. Thank you.
Final word here. Sirius XM Left becomes Sirius XM Progress starting on Monday morning. All I have to say is this, that at this point in our country's history, currently now in the United States, the way it is, the highest form of patriotism has nothing to do with a uniform, nothing to do with a flag, nothing to do with supporting the troops. The highest form of patriotism that you could possibly express right now is to question our government's authority and to protest what's going on right now. Anybody who turns out now to protest, to put their body on the line, and who wants to speak up to protest what the government is doing, that makes you right now in the modern United States a true patriot. That's patriotism now here.
Said, well, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. That's my story. Oh, that's my story. Well, I ain't got a witness and I can't prove it, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up.
Bill Press on Sirius XM Left.
House Republicans vote to repeal Obamacare for the 38th time and replace it with nothing. But don't worry, it's not going to happen. Plus, Rolling Stone in hot water over its latest cover. Hey, forget the cover. Read the article. Friday on The Bill Press Show.
The Bill Press Show. Mornings at 6 East, 3 West. On Sirius XM Left, 127.
From the moment I met her, I felt like I'd known her my whole life. She understands me. We laugh at the same things. She's even started watching football. She tells me anything that I like that much must be worth knowing about. I've told her things I've never told anyone else, and she's always there for me. Her name is Anastasia. She may not live next door, but I've never felt closer to anyone in my whole life.
AnastasiaDate.com. No other dating site comes close. Sign up today and start chatting with your own beautiful, special someone. AnastasiaDate.com.
Hi, I'm Mike, founder of DollarShaveClub.com. For a couple bucks a month, we send amazing razors right to your door. Why did I start DollarShaveClub.com? Well, because gold bars are cheaper than razors these days. I'm trying to remove the hair from my face, not hedge the stock market. I asked, does my razor need a vibrating handle or a flashlight? Well, a parachute maybe, a stun gun sure, but most of that extra crap I don't need. And the big boys are charging me for it anyway. Stop overpaying for shave tech you don't need. Go to my website, it's DollarShaveClub.com. There's a bear.
80% of the companies we talk to who still write paper paychecks to their employees have tried the paperless route and abandoned it. Well, we're your second chance. I'm Dan Smith, president of Simply Paid. We created Simply Paid because companies like yours want paperless payroll. You want to save money, you want to get rid of the bi-weekly paper check rigmarole, and you want happy employees. So we developed Simply Paid to give you all that. And it costs you nothing. The Simply Paid approach is unique. We make paycheck processing and distribution costs disappear. It can save your company thousands of dollars and millions of headaches. And we don't charge you anything. We'll prove it. Call and give us 5 minutes and we'll tell you how much you can save right over the phone. Call Simply Paid toll-free at 855-38-SIMPLE. That's 855-38-SIMPLE. Payroll made simpler. Simply Paid.
Honey, I love this SiriusXM app you got for my smartphone. Perfect for the summer.
Home and away feeds of every Major League Baseball game.
Number 24, Cabrera.
The trade
deadline. Every team's local broadcast. Expert analysis.
I love you so much right now. Anywhere you are this summer, the SiriusXM app is the only way to hear every Major League Baseball game on your smartphone or tablet. Get it today by adding SiriusXM Internet Radio to your subscription and downloading the app for free. Subscription sold separately. Visit SiriusXM.com/all-access for complete details.
SiriusXM Left 127. Ethics.
People are interested in getting the ethics back.
Expect more. SiriusXM Left 127.
AP Radio News. I'm Carlotta Bradley. Thousands rallied in Miami a week after the not guilty verdict in the George Zimmerman trial, part of protests across the country.
Featuring an appearance by Trayvon Martin's father, thousands gathered at the Miami Federal Courthouse demanding a civil rights prosecution of George Zimmerman. Miami area Congresswoman Frederica Wilson was among those saying the jury in Sanford got it wrong.
He took that gun and put it to that young man's heart and pulled the trigger. That's first-degree murder.
Protesters also say they want changes made to Florida's self-defense laws. Tony Winton, Miami.
Hot weather continues to take a toll. Milwaukee is reporting a fifth suspected heat-related death. Delaware its first. Meanwhile, the National Weather Service says straight-line winds have caused problems.
They did produce several reports of severe weather, mostly in the form of wind. Many reports across upstate New York, northern Vermont, parts of New Hampshire, and into Maine that had severe weather with winds.
The investigation has started near Dallas into the death of a woman who was riding on a roller coaster.
Witnesses say the woman fell from the Texas Giant Coaster at Six Flags over Texas.
When they pulled up, the daughter and son of the lady that flew out of the car were hysterical.
Nadine Kelly says the woman's family members said she wasn't properly secured.
They were saying that their mother flew out of the car and the people working there didn't really know what to do.
Tape from KNBC. Another witness told the Dallas Morning News the woman didn't feel safe, but they still let her on the ride. The Texas Giant is 14 stories high and has a drop of 79 degrees. I'm Ed Donahue.
In baseball, the White Sox beat Atlanta. This is AP Radio News. A fugitive former CIA base chief has been flown to the U.S. instead of Italy, which wanted him to serve prison time for the abduction of a terrorism suspect.
After barely a day in detention in Panama, Robert Selden Lady was put on a plane to the U.S. with no explanation. The 59-year-old was caught in Panama Thursday morning when his passport triggered an Interpol alert. He was one of 26 government workers charged with abducting a Muslim cleric in 2003 in Milan, who was held in various U.S. military bases, including Italy. Italian diplomats have said that Panama could have sent Selden Lady to Italy, where he's facing potential jail time, instead of sending him to the United States. I'm Jackie Quinn.
The executive producer of Glee says he's planning a tribute episode for the series' deceased star, Corey Monteith. Monteith's body was found last weekend in a Vancouver hotel room. I'm Carlotta Bradley, AP Radio News.
Stephanie Miller on Sirius XM Left.
In Texas, they want to deregulate everything except the womb.